tested 3 times negative. I was raised in southern Doñana County, but I've lived in Albuquerque for 26 years now. I'm both an Aggie and a Lobo through the law school. I have the honor, in addition to this commission, to also sit on the New Mexico State Regents, which is certainly something I also enjoy. I've been married. Actually, I had my anniversary yesterday, so 22 years.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. 22 years, and she's an educator. Have 2 kids. Youngest is a junior, about to start his junior year. So excited about that. I think we'll see how it goes. High school's fun. Happy to be here. This is such an honor to be part of this process. The inaugural process for the state of New Mexico, and I'm just honored to be a part of it.
Hi, I'm Lisa Curtis. I am the mother of 4, grandmother of 3. I've been a trial lawyer in this state for almost 30 years. I own 4 businesses. I had a short little stint in the state Senate here. I'm the chair of the New Mexico Commission on the Status of Women. I sit on a couple of Supreme Court committees. Gender parity issues in this state have always been of great importance to me. It is not lost on me that I'm the only woman on this 7-person commission. And so I bring with me the 15 women on the Commission on the Status of Women. So technically, there are more of us than there are of them. But I've represented people across the state now for almost 3 decades. I've been in their homes, in those communities. I know there are people here that don't have a voice. And my point is to make sure that we're actually representing the citizens of this state, that we are no longer going to be telling people what to do. We're going to listen to them so that they can tell us what needs to be done.
Thank you. I see Joaquin Sanchez has joined us. Is that correct, Joaquin?
Yes, Justice.
Welcome. Would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, Joaquin Sanchez. What do you just a little bit about ourselves and our position, or what?
Yes.
So let's see. I think somebody mentioned that their anniversary was yesterday. Mine was as well. So married 29 years to Alicia Hernandez Sanchez, and father of 2. My oldest is Josué, who's going to be starting at UNM this year in the civil engineering department. My youngest is Isaac, and he's a junior at Robert F. Kennedy Charter High School in South Valley. And I am a geometry and special education teacher at South Valley Academy. And I am one of the 2 spots that was, one of the 3 spots that was selected by the State Ethics Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Robert?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Robert Radigan. I'm the husband of Allison and father of 6-year-old Leela. My day job is with the University of New Mexico, where I serve as the state demographer. And in that capacity, I worked a lot on the state's complete count campaign to get everybody counted in the census. I was appointed to that commission by Governor Lujan Grisham. Prior to that, I was appointed by Governor Martinez to head the local update of census addresses program, which is the program to ensure that the Census Bureau knows where all the houses are in New Mexico, knows where to find everybody so that they can be counted. And so in that, in that nonpartisan spirit, I feel like this CRC, or the Citizen Redistricting Committee work, is sort of the culmination of a lot of that effort to get everybody counted, because the constitutional reason that we count everybody is for apportionment and redistricting. So, and I do want to say that I'm really sorry I cannot be with you all today. This was a decision that I did not take lightly, but my 6-year-old does have a compromised immunity and a history of difficulty fighting off respiratory infections. So given the current trends with the coronavirus and the evidence indicating that I could transmit the virus despite my being fully vaccinated, I'll be attending these meetings remotely for the time being. So, but I really hope that the situation changes in the coming weeks and months so that we can all, be together and I can hear directly from the public. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Radigan. We completely understand. My name is Ed Chavez. I was born and raised here in the city of Holy Faith. I was schooled in the public school system throughout New Mexico. I'm a demon, I'm a greyhound, and I'm a lobo. I grew up here mainly, but worked weekends and summers on small family ranches in Torrance and San Miguel counties. And I've been married to my wife, Sandra, for this month. We'll start 45 years of marriage. We have 3 children, Agustin, Divina, and Armando, and 8 grandchildren. I love this state. I tried to get back to it in a number of ways. One of the ways was serving on the Supreme Court. I served there for 15 years, and since retirement, I've done a lot of work for the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government. And this happens to be one that I'm very honored to be a part of. And I, like everybody else has said, I really respect this committee. I expect that we're going to be very busy until about October 31st. And I have no doubt that these committee members are fully vested in what we're doing, male or female. But I do understand the criticisms that we have received, but it's up to us to demonstrate to you that we will in fact do our best, not for ourselves, but for you, the members of the public. So I'm looking forward to working with the rest of the committee. Next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Have you all had a chance to look at the agenda? Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
I move to adopt the agenda.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Great, unanimously approved. Next, approval of the minutes of the July 23 committee meeting. Have you all had an opportunity to review the minutes? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
I will second.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Any discussion about the minutes? Any need for revisions? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes of the July 23 committee meeting signify by saying aye.
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 Is anybody opposed? No? Unanimously approved. Next item on the agenda is this being our first meeting, I thought that I would make some comments just to let you know about the committee, its work, and sort of give you a roadmap for where we're headed. Number one, I want to welcome you all who are here in person, but I also want to welcome the ones who are attending by Zoom. And I understand now with COVID haunting us yet again that some people might feel better participating by Zoom. So I'm really happy that the legislature allowed us to also hold these meetings via Zoom. The purpose of this meeting is every 10 years, New Mexico has to redraw its maps for redistricting. And we do it on the basis of data that is submitted by the United States Census Bureau. And the whole idea is to look at population and demographic data that we receive from them. And it's important because there's going to be natural changes in our population. There's going to be migratory changes in our population. People will move into New Mexico, move out of New Mexico. They'll move from one area of New Mexico to another area of New Mexico. And so their communities are going to change. But drawing these districts is not just about numbers. More importantly, it's about people, and it's about their communities. It's about people's challenges in their communities, their expectations, their beliefs, their values, and what a representative government can do to help them meet the challenges in their communities, or to fulfill their expectations, or at least take into consideration their beliefs and values. And I know that I'm not so naive as to think that everybody loves our government. There's always a debate about the role of our government in a free society. And it's an important debate because frankly, it's we the people who are the government. Government is really nothing more than people trying to solve common problems, pulling their resources and working working for the public good. And for that reason, it's really important for all of us to actively participate in our democracy. And when I say that, I think that's what these meetings are going to do for us, is allow the public to actively participate in our democracy. And I think that's important, but at a very minimum, we as adult citizens of New Mexico should vote. And when we vote, it's not only our personal vote, but you're voting also for the people who live in your home, who cannot vote. They also have a voice, but the voice is expressed through the adults in the home. So active participation in democracy is very important. And these meetings are about public input. It's about public input, about the most precious right that we as people have in a free society. And that's the right to have a fair and equal opportunity to elect a representative of our choice. When it comes to preserving that sacred right, it's very important for the governor and the legislature to protect that right and do their job as they reapportion districts every 10 years. Unfortunately, the last 2 decades, the legislature and the governor have not succeeded. The courts have had to draw the districts. And as a result of that, it's been a huge taxpayer bill, over $6 million in attorney fees and costs. But I'll tell you what's worse than spending the money. What was worse in my mind is legislators admitting that they did not or could not take into consideration public input. But I think they've heard the public, because the legislature, the last session, with the exception of 2 dissenting votes, passed the legislation that created your Citizen Redistricting Committee. And they did that in a way that established it as a 7-member committee. The legislation provides for how we are to draw district maps. We have to submit 3 district maps for every district. It'd be Congress, the State House, the State Senate, and our Public Education Commission. For the first time ever, there's actually laws that allow us to consider certain criteria, that require us to look at certain criteria, and that prohibit us from looking at certain criteria. Brian Sanderoff's going to give us a nuts and bolts here in a few minutes, and you will listen to the criteria that we can look at. And as you listen to that criteria, what I'd like for you to do is think about the criteria as being intended to give the people of New Mexico efficient, economic, and effective representation. You know, can your representative travel to meet with you without having to leave their district boundaries? Are they able to keep in close contact with you? Is it easier for you as a community to organize yourselves, to make your presentations to your representatives so that they can effectively represent you? And although population equality is important, the 1 person, 1 vote doctrine, population equality has to be balanced with legal, geographic, and demographic information. And public input is critical as we attempt to carefully balance those factors. I like to describe redistricting as a community project, because it's only with active participation by the communities that we are going to have a better chance at drawing fair and equal maps, so that you have good representation. A representative that reflects the diversity of your communities, a representative that can maintain close and continuing contact with you, a representative that understands the needs and desires of your communities, a representative who can represent a district that has reasonably similar ideas, interests, complexities, so that policies that they support will represent the majority of their constituents. If we, as a Citizens Redistricting Committee, want to best serve our democracy, we must make sure that your input is taken seriously. And we intend to do this by having several public meetings in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. The law requires us to have 12, the minimum of 12 meetings. The first 6 is basically to obtain information about your communities, to hear from you, the experts in your communities. We're not the experts in your communities. You happen to be the ones that live in your communities, you work in your communities, you bicycle or run in your communities, you know what struggles exist in your communities. You know what similar needs you have. And why, you may want to share with us why you want to be included in a single district. Some of you may want to be in more than one district, but we need to hear from you. And we're going to have 8 meetings instead of the 6, the first 2 weeks of August, and we will have them in 11 venues. How do we have 8 meetings in 11 venues? Well, we've decided to try at having some satellite facilities so that communities can get together in a certain location, provide their testimony about maps or what their communities are without having to travel long distances. So when we happen to be in Roswell, we're also going to have a satellite in Portales. When we meet in Las Cruces, we'll have a satellite in Silver City. And when we meet in Farmington, we'll also have a satellite in Gallup. So we're trying our best to reach out to the community and make sure that you have a full and fair opportunity to talk to us and give us the information that we need. We intend to make sure that your input is taken seriously by documenting public input. New Mexico has a public input portal where you can actually go and you can submit written testimony. You can even draw maps on Districture. There's training sessions on how to draw those maps. I will tell you that right now, the data that you're using on Districture is outdated, as are the precincts, but it doesn't mean that you can't draw the boundaries of your communities of interest for us so that we better understand what those boundaries are and what the interests happen to be. After we have these meetings, we will propose some concepts to you. August 16th, the data will be turned over by the U.S. Bureau of Census in a database. They call it a legacy database, but that's going to allow research and polling to gather that data and to make the necessary revisions to the population, to precincts, to demographics. We'll make that data available to districtors so that you, the public, can also draw maps using the most current data and submit them to us either on the portal, or you can show up and testify about your maps, or you can do both. You're welcome to reach us as many ways as possible. We have also contracted with Lily Irvin Vitella. Lily will be the community liaison. Not only will she help you with Districture or the website or community outreach, but she'll also help moderate these meetings to make sure that those who want to testify before us have a full and a fair opportunity to do so. So Lily is an important part of our program. I don't have any firm time limits on your testimony here today. I welcome you to show us maps, to tell us about your communities. But just keep in mind that there are other people who also would like to do the same, either in person or via Zoom. So keep that in mind as we move along. I want to also let you know that committee members may ask you questions about what you have to say. It's not to challenge you, it's only to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what your communities of interest are or what the boundaries are. And after we hear from you here in the room, then we'll turn to the folks that are on Zoom and try to be orderly in that fashion. But if people walk in, we plan on being here for 4 hours. If people happen to come in late and want to testify and 7 o'clock is rolled around, we're going to listen to it. So that's the plan. But before we get to your public comments, I want to introduce Brian Sanderoff, who's going to give us the basics of redistricting. And after his presentation, if you have questions about the ABCs or about our process, you'll have an opportunity to ask those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right?
Can I share screen now? You should be able to. Okay, Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So I'm Brian Sandrell. Basically, our role at research and polling is to provide professional and technical services to you, the Citizen Redistricting Committee. And as such, we're doing a lot of groundwork right now. The chairman mentioned, for example, we're working with county commissions throughout the state of New Mexico right now in splitting 200 additional precincts. There's a state law that says basically if a precinct casts more than 750 votes, that precinct shall be split by the county commission. Well, county commissions are working with us to split precinct boundaries so that we'll then have more building blocks for districting. The more building blocks we have, the more flexibility you will have in drawing plans. There's another law in the books that says if a precinct has more than 2,500 people, it shall be split also. But we won't know that until we get the census. So we may have to go to some places, let's maybe the Southwest Mesa of Albuquerque, where voter participation levels aren't all that high, but population growth is. And so maybe the population has grown there, split some precincts, work with the county commissions, giving us more building blocks. And so that process is going on now. When we get the census data from the Census Bureau, it won't have all of those precinct splits in it, because the county commissions are doing that now. So we at Research and Polling will take the data, add in the precinct split boundaries that the county commissions approve, and rerun all the population data. That plus taking the unwieldy format that the Census Bureau is going to give us the data in which they freely acknowledge. It's going to take 10 days, 2 weeks for us to process it all, add in the precinct splits, recalculate all the total population race data, provide that data to the districtor folks. So the districtor folks are also your vendor for online panel submissions. They're going to need all that precinct split information too. So we'll work with them to get them what they need so that they can do their thing as well. So that's pretty much it. I'm Brian Sandroff, as you know. This is my 5th rodeo. I'm not that old. I hate to say that. Luckily, I did start in my early 20s. But yeah, I was in this building in 1981 doing this. Played different roles over the years. But the last 91, 01, and 11, it's been research and polling, providing the professional and technical services. And as the chairman said, it's not that the last 2 rounds were found unconstitutional by the courts, it's that the legislature and the executive could never agree on any plans. And so it was judge selecting plans. But the judge wasn't drawing plans from scratch. The judge was choosing what we jokingly refer to as the least worst plan and worked within the plans that were submitted by all the different plaintiffs. So it wasn't as if the judge drew. And so now here we are at this point. Brittany Poss, Director of Data Analysis and Data Analytics at Research and Polling, PhD, shy her dissertation, brilliant statistician, among other things. Michael Sharp, so one of the panelists, he was feeling sick this morning, so he decided to join us online. This is Michael's 3rd redistricting of the legislature. And we have many other people working on the databases, the hardware, and the software issues, so that when we help you draw plans or when we evaluate other people's plans, we can see the contiguity issues, precinct issues, Voting Rights Act issues, and the like. So just a little introduction on that. So I'd like to show a little slideshow on the ABCs of redistricting, which I can now, I wrote up the screen and share it. Here we are. Now we can get rid of this.
Brian, I'm not leaving you. I'm just moving over there so I can see.
Okay, and I'm wondering if, so we're getting not the full, can we, or should I go to the?
I think it's your settings. There's a way to show just the window.
You might need to do this.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so it's a little smaller than the full screen, but that should work fine. Okay. There are 5 most basic principles of redistricting. A lot of you have heard this before. We're doing this with the public as well, of course. And these principles are not in this order by accident in terms of at least the top 2, equal population and minority voting rights. Those are the most important according to the federal law. Equal population, minority voting rights. Now, every 10 years, as the chairman said, we redistrict to adjust the boundaries of Congress, legislature, county commissions, city councils, everyone throughout the state. So we're adjusting the boundaries based on equal population. But there are different standards for what equal population means, depending upon whether we're dealing with Congress or the legislature. County commissions, city councils, they follow the same rules as the legislature. But Congress has a different set of standards for equal population, and we'll talk about that. Contiguity. All the precincts within a given district must be contiguous. They must touch at least in one pointed space. You can't have 2 islands within your district. Compactness. Compactness. It's really the shape of the district that counts. If you're looking at districts that look like a snake or look like a pencil, you ought to ask some tough questions about why is that the case. If they come up with a really, really good response, so be it. If there's a community of interest that might mandate it, so be it. But typically when you see snakes and pencils or something like that, you have an issue. Now that doesn't mean size is always a problem, because there are parts of New Mexico where there are very few people, right? Population density, especially in northeastern New Mexico. Sometimes a district, a state senate district can run for 5, 6 counties straight because it takes that many counties to find enough people for 50,000. So it's not as much the size as it is the shape. Communities of interest. What are communities of interest? Communities of interest are in the eyes of the beholder. For some, it might be shared values of people in a neighborhood, shared opinions, shared interests, economic, social, ethnic, cultural, language. You have communities of interest, so people could say to you, okay, I'm not an expert, I can't draw a statewide plan, but here's what I think my community looks like. And I'd appreciate it very much if you don't divide it 3 ways. Within your rules, part of the communities of interest pertain to maintaining political subdivisions where possible. County lines could be a community interest. Someone in some counties are really proud of their county. Cities, neighborhoods, school districts, keeping all the people together in an area because education is a big issue. Geographic features, the Rio Grande, the North Valley is divided by the river, and then there's the west side. Sometimes the river is a geographic feature, sometimes down by Old Town, it might be less so, and so these are kind of community. Now, one thing the chairman touched on, which I know he wants me to because he told me to, is there's no such thing as the perfect plan. And these principles create tension with each other. You may say compactness is so important to me. Someone else may say, but I want my county boundary held whole. So you hold the county boundary whole, you go a little down further into the district, you've just made it less compact. Is there a right or wrong? Not necessarily, but you might get 2 different viewpoints. You might have a community, but it's only 10,000 people. You want it to stay whole, fine, but it has to be joined with some other district. Should it be joined with this district or this district or this district? People will have different opinions on that. So there's tension among the district. For the judge, equal population was really important. Brought down deviations to plus or minus 1-2% sometimes. But that meant communities of interest might be sacrificed. So remember, no such thing as the perfect plan. Do a wonderful thing in one district, you might cause some consequences in another. Unintended consequences sometimes. Touchy thing. Yeah. Okay. Who gets counted? The census counts everyone, you count everyone. When we're talking about total population of a district and making them somewhat equal, and we'll talk about the different standards, you count adults, children are in, citizens are in, college students in the dorms are in, prisoners, non-citizens, undocumented. Everyone gets counted in the total population. I know you've heard some from people with different opinions on what should happen with prisoners, but everyone gets counted. And that's the total population that we look at. When it comes to Voting Rights Act, you look at adult population only. But when it comes to equal population among the different. Now, where does the Census Bureau count people? The Census Bureau counts people at the place where they live and sleep most of the time. So when you were filling out that census form and you were wondering, you're visiting your cousin and you fill it out here or there, or my sister's in town from Atlanta, you just ask yourself, these people were supposed to be counted at the place where they live and sleep most of the time. People had to make that decision on their own pretty much. You know, there were some big cases in the 1960s. These were landmark court decisions that solidified the concept of equal population among the districts. Here, and you probably recognize some of these names, especially Baker versus Carr. And they solidified the concept of one person, one vote, equal population equals equal representation. You know, there was a time in New Mexico where the state Senate was one per county. One legislator, one district per county, and the House was only based on population. So Harding County had one and Bernalillo County had one. Well, some of these cases said no. State House, state legislature, everyone's based on equal population. Why? Well, let's say a district is overpopulated. Let's say we look at the 2020 census and there's this precinct in Rio Rancho on the west side that's really grown a lot. If they keep one senator, then the people in that district will be underrepresented. So they have a lot of people, but one senator. So you adjust the population, you bring it down, and so that each district is represented to the same number of people roughly, and a same legislator. The Census Bureau has told us what the official population of the state of New Mexico is. That's it. They had to do that to reapportion the congressional districts among the various states. You saw that some states lost congressional districts. Reapportionment is gaining or losing congressional districts. Redistricting is when you change the boundaries for what we're doing here. So that's the official population. But when we go over some other stuff on counties, that's all estimates. This is the only official number we have, state number. We changed by 58,000 people from the prior decade. We've added 58,000 people. Our population change over the decade was 2.8%, which shocked a lot of people. Why? Because that's a tiny number. And if you think about it, there's only two different ways you can change your population if you want to put it in the most simplest form. How many people were born versus how many people died, natural growth. And in and out migration. How many people moved in and how many people moved out of the state of New Mexico? Sadly, many more people moved out of New Mexico than in. But because we had more births than deaths, by the time you add it all together, we had a growth rate of 2.8%. And that is shocking at the time. Not shocking to us because it was going to happen, but we're sad about it. Why are we sad about it? Well, because it'd be nice when our kids graduate high school or graduate college, they can stay home. They can find a job opportunity and not have to leave the state. Okay, so there you see on the bottom, the 2010 to 2020, 2.8% growth. But look at the prior decade and the decade before that. We grew at a clip of 20% 3 decades ago and 13%. And also the growth was unequal. Rural New Mexico was losing population. West Side, Rio Rancho was skyrocketing. Las Cruces was doing okay in some of those decades. So not only did we have a lot of growth, but it was unequal in those earlier decades. What that meant was there was a major redistribution of the legislative seats if the east side could no longer accommodate the number of seats it had because it didn't keep pace with population growth, one of the seats would disappear and end up in Rio Rancho or at West Side. That happened for decades in New Mexico. The good news is there's a chance that won't happen this time because our growth rate has been low, and although it has been unequal, it's nothing dramatic as to what we've seen in the past, but there will be pressures. This puts it into historical perspective. Actually, in statehood was 1912, but we started here. We had census estimates from 1910. Look at the growth rate and the line. You know, every decade we're adding 200,000 plus people, except this one. This is the lowest rate of growth in our state's history. These are the 10 counties that we estimate, not official, have increased their population. Look at the right-hand column. Sandoval County, once again, estimate to have grown 13%. But look at the prior decade. Look at the column right to the left of it. When some members on this committee were actually in the legislature, they were dealing with 46% growth rate in Sandoval County in the prior decade, which meant all these new seats were changing. Seats were evaporating in Roswell and Espanola and moving to the west side because the growth was so strong and it was so unequal. Lee County, it looks like, estimates, all depends on when people filled out the census form before the bust and everything, because the form was, back in April and May. We'll have to wait to see the final numbers. But Ebony and Lee have experienced some nice growth. But look at, I want to point your attention to Doñana. Whereas 2 decades it grew by 19.8%, this time only by 5%. Look at Bernalillo, grew by 19% 2 decades ago, this time by 2.9%. So not nearly the rate of growth and not really the unequal growth, but there have been some inequals. And the next page will be the one that, if I can. These are the 23 counties. 23 of our counties have lost population in the last decade. Incidentally, why does it say 2.3% on the bottom right-hand corner rather than the 2.8% that I told you before? Just remember, I told you the only official number we have is the state number, the 2.8. These are county estimates, so it shows up a little differently. Well, these numbers are not official, but they'll be relatively close. I want to point your attention to San Juan County.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask Mr. Sandroff a real quick question.
Sure.
Is there any way to blow that up a little bit? I noticed people in the back are having trouble seeing the figures. Is there any way to get that a little bigger?
If we do, then we'll lose the bottom. Okay.
You can go back, there's also a bottom.
Okay.
Justice Chavez, there's a question from the audience about these materials being available online.
We could put the slideshow, the whole slideshow online.
Along with the meeting minutes.
Yes,
We'll put it on the New Mexico Redistricting.org website.
right.
It'll be with the meeting materials.
I'm using a wireless mouse, it's just having trouble. But San Juan County, okay. So these are counties that lost population. The one I want to point out is San Juan County. Notice in the middle column, it's estimated to have lost 6,700 people, whereas it grew by 14% 2 decades ago. This time, the Census Bureau is estimating that it may have lost 5% of its population. This could create some population pressure in northwestern New Mexico. We've got Farmington, Essex, and Bloomfield, and then surrounded by Indian country. And so this could create some pressure, and there might have to be some expansion of boundaries a little. We'll watch that really carefully. But 23% of 23 of our 33 counties have lost population. And that is a factor we're going to have to grapple with. But again, I can't stress enough, this is not nearly as dramatic as what we've seen in the past. We'll bring it back to our website. Okay. This is population change by region. So actually, you can see the Bernalillo County metro area has grown by 4%. East side actually by 3%. That's because of that growth in Leonetti. That we talked about the northwest quadrant, San Juan, McKinley, Cibola. It's lost population. We'll have to watch that carefully. Okay, so we talked about population. When we think about the ideal population of a district, it's really simple math to come up with it. If you take the population of this state, which you see in the bottom left, we saw that before, 2.1 million people. How many people would be in the ideal, how much population would be in the ideal district for Congress? Well, it's simple math. You just take the population state divided by 3. How many people in the ideally, the perfect population for a state Senate seat? Well, take population state divided by 42, House divided by 70, PEC districts divided by 10. And that's the population, ideal population district. But we talked about how you're allowed to have some leeway on population. You don't have to hit it perfectly, on most things at least. And so we'll talk about that. Okay, now let's talk about the allowable deviation from the ideal. We talked about the ideal population. What's the allowable deviation from that ideal? Different standards for Congress and for the state house. So for Congress, what the courts, this is not Brian's language, this is the Supreme Court's language, try to make the districts as equal as practical, okay? And the courts have talked about over the years computers and abilities now to get things more equal and the like. So the goal, and even within your CRC rules, is to get down to zero deviation. Your rules don't say 0% deviation or 0 people deviation, but basically the goal is to get them almost equal, down to having them each having that ideal population. If they end up being off by 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, that'll be up to you if you're okay with that. The courts have said that you don't have to hit the perfect number, unless the deviation is just, if the deviation is justified by some legitimate state objective, you can get off it, but you don't want to get off it by much. Because if someone came in with a plan, if you came in with a plan that had a 500 deviation and someone had a legitimate reason for it, someone could come in, but we got it down to 100, kept that same legitimate reason. So you want to get close to that 0 deviation, or 5 people, 10 people, and to be safe. 31 states, I looked this morning, 31 states, including New Mexico, had a deviation of 0, 1, or 2 people 10 years ago. 0, 1, or 2 people. The other states had deviations of 50, 100, 150, with a couple of them really took risks and went over 1,000 and tried to convince the judges they had a legitimate reason. Some were successful, some were not. That's why you want to play it safe. But like most things, there's always risk. But the legislature, the state house and the state senate districts, there the courts have used the term must be substantially equal as compared to as equal as practicable. And what the courts, and they recently reaffirmed it in a major case 5 years ago, said, as long as the smallest house or senate district is no more than 10% population deviation between the smallest and the largest, you're prima facie legally valid. If the difference between the population off the ideal, you know what the ideal is, the difference between the smallest and the largest is no more than 10% deviation. Now, the way the legislature for 3 decades has interpreted that is plus or minus 5%. No district should be larger than plus a high end of 5, low end of 5. Your rules are slightly different. Your rules stick to no more than 10% total deviation, but they don't say it has to be 5 and 5. If you theoretically had one district that was at -6 off the ideal, you could have one as high as +4 you'd still be within the plus or minus 10%. You're not limited to the plus or minus 5 that the legislature limited itself to, because they had logistical reasons for doing that. But for you, you have a little more flexibility, but you still can't go beyond the plus or minus 10. I put an over to remind myself. But the courts have also said, although you can play with the deviations of no more than 10% from the smallest to the largest, do not play games with that plus or minus 5% or 10%. Do not use it for illegitimate reasons. The word illegitimate is the court word. An illegitimate reason for keeping 10 districts on the low end of 5% might be to try to protect a region that didn't deserve to maintain that much population any longer. So if the east side of New Mexico didn't have enough population to accommodate all of its districts, if you could put every single one of the east side districts on the minus end, you'd basically be creating a new district. And the courts have said, no, don't do it for that reason. Do it for the right reasons, not the wrong reasons. Or if you use the plus or minus 5% to hurt a bunch of conservative districts, load them all up at plus 5% and hurt a bunch of, so that you would have fewer. So use it for the right reasons, and then you're okay. What's the right reason? Conforming to the Voting Rights Act. If a certain area you're trying to create a Hispanic or a Native American district, and you're going to have to infringe upon some areas that maybe are not as much Native American or Hispanic, and you want to comply with the Voting Rights Act, you might want to keep that district a little smaller so it doesn't have to infringe in some other area. And that tactic might even help in Farmington, Essex, and Bloomfield too. And so that would be an example of a legitimate reason. Okay, minority voting strength. Voting Rights Act, Section 2. Do not dilute the voting strength of ethnic language minority groups, Section 2. Protected groups. Native Americans, Hispanic, African Americans, Asian Americans. Language minority groups too. I remember one time being out in northern New Mexico, and some Anglo guy asked me, well, we're a minority up here, are we protected too? You know, and the answer to that is no, because the Voting Rights Act says who's protected, and they're racial and language minority group. What the spirit of the Voting Rights Act is to give the minority population an opportunity to elect a candidate of choice. It doesn't guarantee that a Hispanic district elects Hispanic. In fact, many times they don't. Or a Native American district elects a Native American, many times they don't. It gives them the opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. Doesn't matter what the race of that candidate is, of their choice. And we do math and regression analyses, and we can calculate who is the choice of a minority group. But certain minority districts are required. But to require them, you have to meet these 3 prongs. This is a very famous Jingles case, 1986, and it continues to be the landmark case for determining whether a minority district is required. And it's been strengthened and changed over the years, but this is the case. Is the minority population large enough and compact enough that they can have enough people, 50% Hispanic voting age pop, 60% Native American voting age pop? They're large enough and compact enough that they can have a large group of Hispanics or Native Americans? 1. 2, do those minority groups vote cohesively? Because if they don't vote cohesively, they're not going to win and elect a candidate of their choice. And through math, we calculate whether or not the minorities vote cohesively. Do they vote for the same candidate, typically? And 3, is there a majority group, usually white, that votes as a block and always makes it difficult for the minority group to win an election? If those 3 I won't get too much deeper into that. I could talk 5 hours on that. If those 3 prongs are met, and if a 4th prong, the courts feel that there's a totality of circumstances that area where you feel you must require a minority district, that the political processes are not equally open to minorities, and that minority group members have had less opportunities to participate and elect representatives of their choosing, and use historical data to show this. And a fancy way of saying, is there a history of discrimination? If all four of those things are met, you're required to create the district. Over the years, the Supreme Court decisions have become a little more conservative, though. And the courts have also said this. If you can't meet those prongs, do not create a district in which race is the predominant criterion in subordination of traditional districting principles. In other words, in North Carolina, don't draw a snake that goes for hundreds of miles along the interstate, picking up all the African Americans just for the sake of picking up all the African Americans. That's a race-based district. They don't have any community of interest. And it was done in subordination of traditional districting principles. So some districts are required. Most Hispanic districts form on their own naturally. In northern New Mexico, you keep the neighborhoods together, you've got a Hispanic district. There are only some places where that's really sensitive. Native American districts, there's enough population. Currently, there are 6 Native American voting age Hispanic districts in the House and 3 in the Senate. And then we'll spend time on that over the next couple months. Okay, the racial gerrymander, though, is when you pack all the Native Americans, all the Hispanics into the same district so they can have fewer districts, because you pack them on the reservation can potentially be packed. And in the past, the Native Americans did not like cracking. So when you split a Hispanic community 3 different ways, so it cannot elect a candidate of choice. Contiguity, simple, not contiguous. On the right-hand side, A. You can't have District A because you have 2 islands. Compactness. There are 30 different measures that we can run on computers of measures of compactness. They're all weak, but they do have some value because you can compare plans to each other. A Supreme Court justice famously once said, redistricting is the one area where appearances really do matter. There's a similar quote to the pornography case, but so basically, yes, appearances do matter. There are ways of measuring compactness, but you usually know it when you see it. That's northern New Mexico's 3rd district. That's from 1991. It looks very similar to that today. That's the Northern Congressional District. And then there's Texas's famous 18th Congressional District. One of the disadvantages of districting at the block level rather than the precinct level is you can do monkey business like that you see in Texas. Okay, traditional districting principles, communities of interest, we talked about it. Here, rather than a theoretical discussion, and I'm almost done, is we took those traditional districting principles and read the law, and we read your rules. You have rules that say what you shall, what you may, and what you cannot take into consideration. And here they are. The CRC districts shall be reasonably compact. They shall be contiguous with their precincts. They must be single member districts. In other words, you can't have 2 legislators running in one. You can't change your 70-member legislature into 140 members and have double up on the district. You shall attempt. This is to say you shall attempt to preserve communities of interest. In your rules, they're defined as taking into consideration geographic and political boundaries, including political subdivisions and Indian nations and tribes and pueblos. So counties, cities, school district boundaries, pretty hard to incorporate, frankly, things like school district boundaries, but at least keeping a whole city that has one school district, is something to consider. But the tribal areas, there's a checkerboard area in Navajo. And then, of course, most of the Native American population is in that northwest quadrant. So it is very doable to build Native American districts, both for the House and the Senate. The Mescalero sitting there down by the south, 3,000 people, but it's not going to end up in a Native American district because it's isolated in southern New Mexico. Okay, your rules shall be composed of entire precincts and may split them only if necessary to comply to the Voting Rights Act. So we would work with you if someone comes in with a plan that splits precincts, would work with you, we'd work with the lawyers, we'd come to a conclusion of whether or not we would recommend the lawyers and everyone that is that split really complied to the Voting Rights Act, or is it necessary or not necessary? And so we've definitely worked on that. Okay, so we went over the shalls and the, I'm sorry. We went over the shalls. Look at the may. Your rules say you may preserve the core of existing districts. If you like the existing plans, you may preserve the core. And it says in your rules, but they have to be subordinate to the ones above. CRC district shall not. Again, this isn't us, this is your rules and the law. Senate Bill 304. You shall not use partisan election data or voter registration data in designing plans except to ensure that the plan complies with the Federal Voting Rights Act. We are building our political database. We need them for determining whether minorities and Native Americans vote cohesively in certain districts in order to require those districts to conform to the Voting Rights Act. There's math, there's statistics, regressions, what we do with the election data to figure out which districts are required or not. The way we've worked it out, the way you've worked it out is we will go over the election data, not with you, but with the lawyers. And the lawyers will guide us in that process. And then we report to you, and the lawyers report to you about our findings. And that way we keep all the election data, the partisan stuff out of the design of the plans. The CRC shall not, this is a tricky one, consider the voting address, shall not consider the voting address of incumbents except to avoid pairing them unless other districting principles do not necessitate the pairing. I had to read that 5 times. But basically what it's saying is you shall not consider the voting address of incumbents except to avoid pairing. Well, the only way to avoid pairing is if we consider the voting address. But then your rules say, but still don't keep them separated if you have to conform to other communities of interest. And so that's where we're probably going to be seeking out guidance. There's, there seems to be in that writing some leeway, and we're going to definitely need some guidance along the way as plans are evaluated. Did this plan, I'll leave it at that, and hopefully we'll get guidance on that issue. Here's an example of communities of interest. And Robert Radigan, Robert, you once talked about the colonials and trying to, identify areas where there are underserved areas of the state, whether they should be kept together or not. Can they elect a candidate of their choice? Okay, bear with me for a minute. You are looking at House District 53 in the middle of this page. You are seeing this is current. You're seeing other House Districts, 54. You're seeing Las Cruces coming up there on green. Las Cruces would be coming very close, entering Las Cruces, would be going up the Mesilla Valley. 34 and 52 would have Anthony and Santa Teresa and Sunland Parks. But 53 is a district. The center line is the county line between Doñana County and Otero. Everything to the left of the center line is Doñana. Everything to the right of the center line is Otero. Chaparral is a underserved, unincorporated area on the Texas line. It's isolated. It's about a 25-minute drive to El Paso, actually, and a 25-minute drive to Anthony. But there's a little mountain range in between those two, which slows you down a little. And so this is current. So what did the legislature do last time, or at least the judge? Chaparral is unified in one district. It split a county line, Doñana and Otero, because a determination was made that keeping Chaparral together, a lot of people liked more than worrying about a county line. 51 is Alamogordo. And just on the outskirts of Alamogordo is Holloman Air Force Base, which is in 53. So really, this is a chaparral Holloman Air Force Base district. And then taking in really small communities, touching upon Las Cruces, touching almost on Alamogordo. So this is an example of, do you keep the community together or do you split the county line? Right, we talked about the tensions. Now, the next slide is the Senate district. But the next slide, we're going to blow up the circle, okay? The next slide is the blow up of the circle. So you're looking at you're just looking at Chaparral now. And everything on the left-hand side is a Senate district that goes to Anthony and Las Cruces, and everything on the right is a Senate district that goes to Carlsbad. So here you're seeing Chaparral was split. I forgot to tell you, this district did end up electing someone from Chaparral. Here you're seeing Chaparral split. Was it done intentionally, in my opinion? No. Was it done to harm Hispanics? In my opinion, no. It was done because the district coming in from District 34 from Carlsbad needed more population and just kept picking up. And so less concern was expressed for it, say perhaps, I don't think it was done intentionally for the reason of racial dilution. But if it has an effect, then so be it. So that's an example of the Chaparral being split between 31 and 34 on the Senate, and the kind of give and take that we go through. Mr. Chairman, at that, I think that concludes the ABCs.
Thank you, Mr. Senderoff. Any questions from the public about either Mr. Senderoff's presentation or our process? What about on Zoom? Any hands up? Do you have a question, Ms. Mason?
Would you try to explicate that whole incumbent protection clause a little further? So, because that was one of the, that was number 11 in the legislative guidelines that incumbency could be considered. I thought that was very objectionable. It looked like this was an attempt to address it, but I think it's totally obfuscating the meaning, that second sentence. And I'm just trying to get, what does it mean? Are incumbents going to be protected?
Yes.
Or considered, I should say. Incumbency could be considered or not?
Let me try to answer that. We will have a lawyer on board to counsel us. I think what is meant by the legislation is take a look at the residency of an incumbent to see if you're going to pair them, and try to avoid pairing them unless other districting principles dictate that you should go ahead and pair them because the other principles are more important.
What does pairing mean?
Pairing means when you put them to run together. You put a Democrat to run against a Democrat, you put a Republican to run against a Republican, or you put a Democrat to run against a Republican. Incumbents, we're talking about those who are already in office.
So you basically built a district where you have drawn two incumbents' houses within the same district. So they're forced to run against each other.
And then next to it might be a vacant district where there are no incumbents. So if you don't take into account the address of the residence addresses of the incumbents, it's more likely that you're going to be pairing some people unintentionally. But yeah, this language is tricky. It's basically saying don't take into account the address unless to avoid pairing them. But if you want to conform to communities of interest, if that becomes more important, then consider pairing them. And that's why it seems to be leeway as to which priority is taken in the course of designing plans. Is that fair?
I think when the legislature is thinking about their language, they're recognizing that there is some value to continuity of representation. But by the same token, there are other principles that are very important. And if you take those into account, and they are more important in the judgment of the committee based on public input, then they can be paired. You could run incumbents against incumbents.
Yes, Chairman, Kathleen Burke, Redistricting, New Mexico. Just to clarify, you said that any redistricting principle would override the pairing of incumbents. Is that right?
It seems to me that that's the language, but again, I would say that the committee is going to have to rely on legal representation as well. That's a reasonable interpretation, though, in my mind.
Okay, and when you say any redistricting principle, we would refer to, has that list been codified already? Which principles?
Yes, the principles that the committee shall consider would govern. This is a permissive. It's actually written as a prohibition with an exception that has yet another exception.
And Mr. Chair, don't you think it matters too what the public has to say about that?
Yeah.
What they think is important for their particular district is, at least I think what we understand we're supposed to be looking at when we're looking at that exception. What do the people down there want to have?
Chair, if you're going to take questions from the audience, it'd be better if they either repeated the question or they came to the public comments camera, because the folks at home won't be able to hear picking up on the mic.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Pierce. Ms. Kendra, you had a question about the maps. Did you want to come up and share that question, or did you feel like it was answered in Mr. Sandaroff's presentation?
Oh, the difference in the shading on the.
Yeah.
No, I think it was answered.
Okay, great. Was there anybody on Zoom who had clarifying questions for Justice Chavez or Mr. Sandaroff?
Two participants have their hands raised. So I see, forgive the name pronunciation, but Paula Sabloff. And so I'm going to allow you to talk, Ms. Sabloff. And you may unmute yourself now and provide public comment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. My question is, since the state experienced great growth between 1990 and 2010, why must we limit the number of seats in the New Mexico House and Senate to 42 and 70? Why can we not increase the number of seats?
Go ahead, Brian.
The state constitution sets it at that number.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sabloff. I'm going to go ahead and mute you now. Next hand that's raised is Maureen Scourin. Ms. Scourin, I'm going to unmute you and allow you to talk. Ms. Scourin, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, I just wanted to say that the public comment camera is facing the ceiling. If anybody has used that, I haven't been able to see them.
It's intentional. It's for folks to be able to come up and talk directly into the camera when they want to provide public comment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Which is a beautiful set.
Any other hands raised? On Zoom.
No, sir. Justice Chavez, there are no other hands raised on Zoom.
Thank you, sir. So the next item on the agenda is for the public here in the room. Billy?
Great. Ms. Burley, here you are. You're first. Why don't you come up if you can speak into the camera so folks can.
The camera right there?
Yes.
Right there.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Justice Chavez, members of the committee. I'm Hannah Burling, and I am the president of the League of Women Voters of New Mexico. And first of all, the League would like to thank the committee members for volunteering to do this truly valuable work for the people of New Mexico. The League has a long history of advocacy in redistricting reform, both in the legislative and legal arenas. The New Mexico League has been active since the 2011 cycle. We would like a process and standards that provide the people with meaningful choice in their elected representatives and facilitate government accountability. So that's what we'd like. We were very proud to be a part of the effort to pass the Redistricting Act that formed this committee. Although we didn't get everything we wanted in the legislation, it was a big step forward. I have already submitted our advocacy statement through your online portal, but I do have extra copies if anyone wants one. I'll be right over. And again, thank you so much for what you're doing. And we urge you to take into consideration the League's position on redistricting in our statement. Thank you.
We'll have Mr. Roger Taylor next.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Roger Taylor. I'm a resident of Galisteo, New Mexico, which is a traditional village, historic. We are CD3, Senate District 39, House District 50. I think some of the things that are important just from the experience of working in a number of these communities. I'm the president of our community association. When we get out to semi-rural and rural areas, there is a history and a tradition of communities that really spend a lot of time in committees and volunteer work that are to help proactively address common problems and common interests. And so it's important to try and recognize that as you're going through the redistricting. Taking large urban populations and combining them with more rural areas that might have different challenges may not be the best way to do that. But these are things to think about. Looking at our own House district, because I think our CD3 has a good commonality. If I look at our Senate district, there seems to be a good satisfaction level there. But if I look at our House district, there are some interesting incongruities, some things that go well together and some that do not. If you look at one part, the Santa Fe County component, which is El Dorado, Galisteo, Lamy, the Cerrillos, Madrid, you're looking at some traditional historical culture. You're looking at artists. You're looking at retirees. You're looking at people who have commonalities of interest in the environment, the arts, and in maintaining a certain way of life and culture. When you start getting further down into Edgewood area, and then you get into some of the other counties, which is more of a ranching, agricultural, we all share similar issues about environment, water, and those sort of things. But I suspect that some of the residents in those areas would say that they have some very different things that they need to address. So I think it's good to be looking at that and to be looking at not just a current existing in its entirety, but then sort of breaking out population segments. And I would say, just as an example, having worked as an observer in Edgewood during the voting elections this past year, one of the things that I noticed that was somewhat counterproductive to encouraging people to vote was that Edgewood is split up in voting districts over several counties. But a lot of people are confused about that because they think they live in Edgewood and they would come to vote and be told, no, you have to go down to Sandoval to vote. You have to go here to vote. And you have working people, you have people who don't have that kind of time. And I know that there were people who did not vote, at least on the days they came in, because they were limited on their time and being away from the job. So I think those are things that are important to look at. Communities of interest or commonalities are important. And looking at how that breaks out over the way these things are districted is also important. As a member of the Santa Fe County Census Committee, who represented about 10% of Santa Fe County's population out in these rural areas, I appreciate what you're doing. I think it is critical, and I do think that looking at these districts is a very important task. So thank you for giving that time. Many of us are volunteer activists in the community, and we all know what that means. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort, but it's because we all care. So thank you.
Any question?
Yes.
Yeah, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Do you have, for your community, for Galisteo, I mean, do you have a boundary in mind? I mean, that you would propose, that you feel like would put you in the House district that would more fairly represent what your community needs are?
I don't know that I have that specifically. I would say that Galisteo probably leans more towards El Dorado, Santa Fe area, and lesser out towards the further southwestern area, out towards Estancia, Valencia, that area. But I'm not saying that it's a necessity to change that boundary. I'm just making some comments of things to think about.
I just know for us, it's one of the things that's really important is because you know your community, you know where your boundary lines are, that, you know, we really would like to hear from you. If you could draw your district so that your community needs you feel are more properly addressed by whoever's representing you, where would you draw that line?
I will have to look at that and see. It's a great question, and I will see if I can't address that.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Ms. Martinez. My name is Loida Martinez. I am from Rio Arriba County, born and raised, and I'm an advocate and activist in northern New Mexico, basically for a very long time. I'm concerned about redistricting and the racial dilution that possibly could happen, because Rio Arriba County is a very poor county, and we've lost some citizens in that area. So I want to emphasize the importance of, yes, we do, and I'm not representing the community, I'm representing myself and a voice for the community. But it gives the minority population an opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. If you guys consider doing a racial dilution, it sets us back. Our children are moving to Rio Rancho. So the history and tradition is going to Rio Rancho, and I'd like for you to really consider in any redistricting for CD3, consider just enhancing Sandoval County, the Rio Rancho area, because that's where our children are moving to. And that's why you're seeing lower count than 10 years ago. And the minority rights, voting rights, and the community of interest is so important to us. If you would take us like to Roswell, I would see that as racial gerrymandering. And I'd like for you to really consider keeping our people and our culture together, our history and traditions. Thank you very much.
Other questions? Yes, I just want to make sure I understood what you said. So in other words, because of that movement from Santa Fe to Rio Rancho.
No, from Espanola, Rio Arriba.
I didn't mean that, I apologize. Well, Santa Fe too. Santa Fe is having a lot of people who can't afford to live in Santa Fe.
But I'm representing Rio Arriba today.
So you're saying you want to keep Rio Rancho in the north because of that.
That's correct.
Okay.
It keeps the history and traditions of northern New Mexico, and it keeps the minority voting rights intact. And it doesn't do the racial dilution that if we go to, say, Roswell, there's no community of interest there.
Right, so there's nobody else who put a star by their name, but if you were sitting here and you were thinking during this meeting or inspired by what somebody else said, we'd certainly like to give you an opportunity to come up and share. So please, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
I will.
Thank you. Right here, so that way they see you here and so does the committee.
Justice, thank you very much for the meeting and all of you members, as well as for people in the audience who put so much effort into the legislation that created this body and its process. So it is impressive to me. I am Paul Deerdack, who is a citizen here in Santa Fe, that we see democracy at work, even in the course of inventing some of its features. And that's a powerful, powerful privilege. I did submit written testimony, and I won't repeat it. I wanted to add a few comments, but Mr. Sanderoff, as he often does, did a very good job of preempting one of them, and I'm glad for that. But here's the other one. My comment was about communities of interest, and I made the case in writing that northern New Mexico is a community of interest. These communities put so much work and effort over long periods of time in creating relationships among communities across the region so that we can solve governance and policy problems together. We have seen the samples of some maps that people are already starting to submit that would divide the districts in New Mexico, not along latitude, but along longitude. And those ideas, I argued in the written piece, are not ideas that are motivated by community, but are motivated, from my point of view, as a destructive of community that we have put a lot of effort into building. And so the principle that comes up in the permissive criteria of keeping current districts, I think it uses the term core, the core of the current district. That is a high moral value from this perspective when we speak about communities of interest. So the addition, that much you will find in writing. The addition, however, is that not only does longitudinal division of New Mexico run afoul of destructiveness, it also runs afoul of delay. Perfecting our governance and perfecting our policy is time constrained, as all of us know from our experience. It takes a lot of time to build the relationships that it takes for communities to work with each other. And squandering that investment that we've already put in order to re-scramble the omelet costs us time. And in our governance and legislative advocacy that we are engaged for the public good right now, time is our most critical resource. Absolutely. Losing a generation because we're going to rebuild the relationships among communities, it would be terribly destructive in our view. So once again, thank you so much. And I turn you to the written material.
Thank you, Mr. Deerdack. Did I get your name correct?
You do almost. D-I-R, D as in David, A-K. Thank you, sir.
Chairman, may I?
Yes.
Do you mind if I ask a question very similar to what Ms. Curtis asked a few minutes ago? I read your comments. I saw, I think, the congressional proposals that you're referring to. So I guess my question is, and I'm going to add a little bit more specificity to this, but where would you suggest the boundaries be? And I guess what I'm saying is, let's say you include the Northwest, area, the Native American communities, the Santa Fe community, Rio Arriba, perhaps even Rio Rancho, parts of Rio Rancho. what then would be the boundary? Would you continue to include Clovis? Would you go up to Clayton? You know, some specifics like that, I guess. Well,
I thank you for asking it just that way. It seems to me that the approach should be one which you have already alluded to, quite frankly. That taking lines that exist and moving them either north or south by increments of a county or more than one if necessary, and maybe doing it in more than one place so you don't have to do it so much in any one place, is a far more modest approach to redistricting than taking an east-west line and turning it into a north-south line. That's my point. And I think I wrote toward the end of my article that I find it very strange that I am promoting modesty. My friends will know that that almost never happens. But in this task, radicality is the enemy of democracy, in my view. It often is not. But when it comes to redistricting, it is. Thanks for your question.
Are there other questions of the committee?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Is there anybody else who's present who would like to make comment? Please.
Would you mind terribly moving the computer back about a foot and a half, just pushing it back?
Sure.
Thank you.
Is that about right?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys for coming here and listening to us. I'm actually from Alamogordo. My name is John Block, and I come a little bit of a far ways, but I think it's so important that we have fair districts for our people in this state. I've heard many radicals from the left and the right talk about gerrymandering and putting partisanship in this process and disguising it as things like, minority rights or, equity. And so I think it's so important that we keep our communities of interest together because, the second district where I live in the congressional map, it's important that we keep all of our districts together that have the same similar aspects to them. The oil patch, I don't think that it should go all the way up toward Espanola, where northern and southern New Mexico don't really jive. So it's important that those kind of communities of interest do stay in the same places. And also, like my state house district where I'm at, 51, we're in Alamogordo. That's like just the city limits. But the district next to us, 54, expands all the way to Carlsbad and Artesia. That representative is going to have a hard time going all the way across the county line, coming over to Otero County and talking to the folks here. So I think it's important that we put folks in Cloudcroft and Weed and Mayhill and Pinon into the Alamogordo district for the state house. And I have proposed that. I put it on the redistricting website. So please look at that. It's so important that we keep these communities together so that we can have a representative that can get to that district. I can take a 20-minute drive to Cloudcroft and Representative Jim Townsend in the next district, he'd have to take a 2 or 3 hour drive. So I think that's super important. And then just keeping the partisanship out of the process because, it's important that we keep communities of interest together. However, that should not be the only thing that we look at. If there's a minority group that needs to be protected, we should not be compromising another district just because we're looking at the extreme minority that may live near that district. Maybe they would be better suited in somewhere that is more, racially or ethnically or economically benefited by their place in that district. So I would just make sure that you look at that redistricting process very measuredly and very conservatively so that we do not do anything really radical. 2% change in population is nothing crazy, but we should look at those disparities that did happen in the last redistricting that was in 2011, and so that we can fix those for the future. So I thank you all so much for listening today, and I look forward to any questions.
Yeah, so I have a question. I want to make sure I understood you because I need to bring the map so I can try to follow what you guys are saying. So
okay,
you're talking about you're in District 51.
Yeah, House District 51.
Okay. And And you do not want to be in 53, 56, or 54.
No, I think it would be more beneficial to even add some of District 54 to District 51, the Cloudcroft, Weed, Mayhill communities, because they all share the same communities of interest. You know, many of the same folks that live in those areas are very similar to folks in Alamogordo. So I think it would be beneficial to add those people in so that their representative doesn't have to drive 2 hours to visit them. If that makes sense.
Because all in all, I have a lot of questions about 53, 51, 54, 55, and 61. And the way that they're laid out, because 54, just from a distance standpoint, is enormous.
It is.
But since we don't have the incumbents' addresses anywhere, I don't even know where they live to know about the pairing issue, so I don't quite understand it. But anyway, so I just wanted to make sure I understood what you were saying. So what you're asking for is, rather than 51 end up someplace else, that 51 potentially be expanded to take over maybe some of Otero County that 54 currently has.
Exactly. And I believe that there has been a population change in Alamogordo and in Carlsbad. So I think that change in population can help be more equitable when we're moving those folks to different districts, and also just keep those communities together. Because I know in 53, right to the west of us, we have the Holloman Air Force Base, and that's our entire economy. You know, we want to keep those folks together with our people in our district, but we also want to add, if we're losing any population, we want to be adding more people that are very similar to us. So that's just what I'm looking for. So I did put a proposed map on the redistricting on Districtor. So please look at that, and thank you all. Great.
What is your Senate district?
I'm in Senator, I believe it's Griggs. I forget the number of that district.
Are you okay with the Senate district?
I am, yeah, it does. I believe it is one of those districts that goes down to Chaparral. And so we have to do what we have to do to keep those districts in order. But I do think it's a large district. It does go all the way toward, Carlsbad and Artesia. But with any redistricting or new population changes, that could benefit us with keeping it a little more compact and a little more closer to my community.
Under the status quo plan, what happened, the way it was drawn, it started in the southeast corner. District 61 was drawn, and then Carlsbad districts were drawn. And incumbency are issues here at the time. And remember, the legislators have changed too. So what happened was Senate 54 was needing to pick up population to get to the ideal population, and it stretched as far as Cloudcroft to get there. And we're hearing from our witness that he thinks Cloudcroft belongs more with Alamogordo than with Carlsbad. Now, under a status quo oriented plan, it being that we've seen that Eddy and Lee County have gained population, under a status quo oriented plan, hopefully 54 wouldn't have to stretch as far as Cloudcroft anymore, and Cloudcroft could go back with Alamogordo. Or you could focus on a plan that just says hard fixed, Alamogordo and Cloudcroft are together, and then that'll create consequences somewhere else. But that might fix itself under a status quo oriented plan, because Eddy and Lee County have some excess population. It may not have to stretch to Cloudcroft. But either way, it's a very important observation to remind people that Cloudcroft has a lot more in common with Alamogordo than it does with Carlsbad.
You're right.
Will you be sure to sign in so we can sign in just so we can sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Block.
Is there anybody else who is listening and in the room and would like to say something? Right, Celine, do we have some folks on Zoom?
Yes, we do. Justice Chavez, we have 2 individuals with their hands up on Zoom, and I'm just going to go in order of hands raised. So we have Castile Aguilar. Ms. Aguilar, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk. Unmute yourself now.
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking some time to hear what us and our communities have to say. My name is Castile Aguilar, and I am here as a representative from Youth United for Climate Crisis Action, or YUCCA for short. As youth that grew up in New Mexico, and particularly in northern New Mexico, we have members that have lived firsthand through the impacts of oil and gas extraction. We would like to state our concerns that the redistricting process will not serve our communities like we think it should. This last legislative session, we saw huge concern about the climate crisis and our toxic relationship with these extractive industries, with the abundance of climate-based policy that was proposed. We need to be accountable to the communities in these areas, seeing that most of these communities, through New Mexico in general, are communities of color, and particularly Indigenous communities. It's time for our disproportionately impacted communities to not be sacrificed in our community destruction, in things like redistricting, and especially in terms of oil and gas. Our concern is that these communities will be marginalized and continue to be disproportionately impacted by oil and gas, which the areas that we're talking about today are already impacted by oil and gas pretty greatly. And that these areas are gonna lack proper representation for our voices if it's redistricted improperly. In the presentation, there were 5 principles of redistricting, but how do we ensure that once redistricted, that these communities that should be represented in decisions for their communities, like we're hearing today for the public comments, that their voices aren't going to end up being negatively skewed so that industry like oil and gas can continue to toxify and extract these lands, water, and air, with the support of, honestly, our elected officials. We want to make sure that when we're talking about redistricting, we're not talking about silencing the voices of our marginalized communities. And we've already heard one great example through voting, which we've already seen all over the US, and we don't want that to be the case here. And then, of course, that our voices that are represented are being properly represented by our elected officials. And I also just want to elevate something that was already said, is that when we're talking about redistricting these communities, we're also talking about separating and dividing these communities, which also looks like dividing representation, which might not be the proper representation for our communities and our community needs. And in this case, what that looks like is redistricting. And so thank you for your time, and I look forward to any questions.
Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Aguilar.
Thank you, Ms. Aguilar.
I'm going to go ahead and mute you now, Ms. Aguilar, and the next person is Evelyn Vinogradov. I'm going to allow you to talk, and you can unmute yourself now.
Thank you. Am I unmuted appropriately?
Yes.
Thank you. I am from Edgewood, and I would like to thank Roger Taylor for beginning a conversation about Southern Santa Fe County. It may not be apparent because actually Roger did not bring this up, but Edgewood is split as a town of 6,000 people, is split in 2 different congressional districts. The west side of Edgewood is in Congressional District 1, and the east side of Edgewood is in Congressional District 3. This is also the case for our state representation. We are split into State House District 20 on the west side, or 22 on the west side, and 50 on the east side. I would like to ask this committee to take into consideration the communities of interest in these small towns that have incorporated either in the last 10 or 20 years and try to combine their congressional district representation. I did work as a poll worker in the special election that was held in May, and I worked in Edgewood for 1 month. Every other person who came in to vote was either inappropriately coming in as a CD3 voter and needed to have an explanation as to why they could not vote in the special election for the CD1 representative. So it was quite frustrating experience. I know, having seen Mr. Sandroff's slide presentation, that Chaparral was used as an example of a combined, looking at Chaparral as an entity and making a special effort to combine, the population. So I'm sure that the division of Edgewood was not intentional. It seems that the Highway 344 was the dividing line between CD1 and CD3, and I certainly hope that that can be remedied in this redistricting effort. Thank you very, very much for the time.
Questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vinogradov. I'm going to go ahead and mute you now. The next person, I believe, is Senator Liz Stefanik. Senator Stefanik, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You may talk now.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I was just going to listen in, but I'd like to make some comments about my district, Senate District 39, which goes from San Miguel County down through much of Lincoln County. And I think that this is probably an issue that some of the congressional members have as well, is that many of our communities don't feel connected to other parts of the district. So, for example, Lincoln County has strenuously objected being connected to Santa Fe County. And in fact, 2 years ago, their county commission passed a resolution asking that when we get to redistricting, that they be considered along with the southern counties, because that's where they believe they have some interest, a community of interest. Now, as a state senator, I like all of my constituents. I represent all of my constituents, regardless of party. And the state of New Mexico is really a wonderful place to drive from county to county. But we do have some counties, and I know you're traveling the state, we do have some counties who feel a little disconnected. Now let's talk about Edgewood and Moriarty. I represent quite a bit of southern Santa Fe County, but I don't represent Edgewood. I represent all of Torrance County, but I don't represent Moriarty. So I think that there are some communities that could be reviewed as you move forward. And I do understand about not dividing precincts, communities. I sat on our Santa Fe County Commission for 8 years. We had to redistrict and redraw lines. But I think that this district is not as common with community interests as maybe a former speaker spoke, indicated. So I hope that you will look at Senate District 39. Thank you.
Senator Stefanik, this is Ed Chavez.
Yes, Judge.
First and foremost, I want to thank you for sending out a blast email to all of your constituents, inviting them to please participate during these meetings. I really appreciate that, Senator. And I will take to heart what you have said about San Miguel de Lincoln County being a little bit awkward and that the communities would like for us to consider some separation.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to go ahead and mute you now. Justice Chavez, there are no other hands raised on Zoom.
Okay.
I wonder if you might, just for folks who maybe aren't as comfortable with Zoom, remind people how to raise their hand just in case.
Sure. So at the bottom of your screen, when you hover, if you're watching this through Zoom, you'll be able to hover your mouse over the Zoom window and you should only see one button at the bottom that says raise hand. If you press that, it'll indicate that you want to provide public comment.
While we're waiting for that, I wonder, is there anybody else in the room who's had a change of heart, a change of mind, and you're desperate to get your point out? No desperation needed. We're all here, happy to listen. All right.
Committee, would you mind taking a 10-minute recess?
Yep.
We will be in recess for 10 minutes. Mr. Cangelosi, I believe you wanted to take up an issue regarding the minutes. Yes, in the last meeting.
I didn't see it with my first review, but the second review, I'm sorry that we've already voted on it, but the time that I logged in was not what was represented in the minutes. I'd like to have the thing to change that. I think it was around 9:10 that I logged in. Not 10:40. That would have put me in the meeting for 7 minutes. So.
You voted in favor of the motion, and so I think you have a right in Robert's Rules of Order to request to reconsider the motion.
Yeah, so I motion to putting forth a request to correct that.
Is there a second?
Yes, and I believe the motion should be a motion to reconsider the minutes.
Motion to reconsider the minutes on the table. Any discussion? The idea being, rather than reflecting that Mr. Cangelosi arrived or joined the meeting at 10:40 a.m., it would be 9:10 a.m.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that the record reflect the time that Mr. Cangelosi was on the record, and so that the minutes are specific in terms of the time he first got on in the meeting. And I think he can explain what that time is for the purpose of the record.
All right. Anybody else with questions, comments? Mr. Cangelosi?
So it reflects in there that I logged in at 10:40 when I actually logged in at 9:10.
So 10:45?
9:10.
9:10.
9:10.
All right, any further discussion? All those in favor of allowing the amendment to the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Unanimously passes. Thanks for calling that to our attention. Next, we'll move to Brian Sanderoff on our New Mexico redistricting.org website and districtor. We have some maps up there. We're able to pull those maps up and describe them for us.
Yes, we have reviewed them. So just start at the top.
Please.
And I just have all my pages out of order now that I jumped them, but that's okay. Okay, so within the district report hole, people are beginning to make comments, which is great. And they hopefully realize that this is 2020 census data. This is 2020 precincts. It's not even the precincts that we used in redistricting for 2012. It's old stuff, but that doesn't matter because people can submit their concept. So here we did have a witness who spoke to this plan. This is the plan, the idea of keeping Alamogordo intact with Cloudcroft and High Rolls, communities that are just up the mountains from Alamogordo. That currently Cloudcroft is in House District 54 and goes all the way to Carlsbad. So there's a district that starts at Carlsbad. It stretches across Eddy and Otero County. It didn't have enough population, so it went in there and pulled in Cloudcroft. He's suggesting that no, Cloudcroft should be with Alamogordo. It's right up the mountain chain, and they have a community of interest. So that is an idea that is very reasonable. And as I mentioned, it's assuming you do a status quo plan, because these plans are starting in one corner and just moving across, picking up population. It's possible this could remedy itself because Eddy and Lee are going to have some extra population, so that Carlsbad district might not have to carry over as far as High Rolls and Cloudcroft. And so this is something that would be reasonable for you to strongly keep in mind.
Any questions?
Mr. Chair, this is Robert Radigan. I'm not seeing research and polling screen. I see a message that research and polling has started screen sharing, but I'm not seeing the map that he's referring to.
Sometimes if you go out and go back into screen share, it'll recognize what you're sharing.
We're going to work on that, Mr. Radigan. Hold on one moment. Can you see it now?
I am not. Is it just me? Is Joaquin, are you seeing the map?
I can't see it.
You can see it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, maybe the problem's on my end. I'm gonna drop off a Zoom and back on because I'm having a few other errors, so I'll be back shortly.
Right, you could look at it right within the district or site.
Right.
He logs in again, it might remedy it.
Okay, did that explanation suffice for everyone, or do we need more? Is that something that should definitely be something to think about if we can fit it into a statewide plan?
I think that's right. We don't know the exact population, right? So.
Right, we don't know the population of that. And we also, as I said, this Senate House District 54 is coming in from Carlsbad. It may not need to go as far, and this might be an easy fix. Okay, so moving on to the next one.
Can we wait for Mr. Radigan
Oh, I'm
to
sorry.
log in again?
So,
I'm here and I can see the map.
so in looking at the map, Brian,
Yeah.
so he does take in what Mr. Block was proposing. He takes in much more than just Alamogordo and Cloudcroft, right?
Right. But some of that area is not very populous.
So is it being taken to try to find population?
He's taking Alamogordo and keeping it whole, and then trying to move up the mountains to Cloudcroft, and then into some of the national forests where there are not many people, but there's a lot of geography. Did he try to count how many people on the evaluation? So yeah, and he calculated 33,000 population in there, which is pretty close to fitting in that plus or minus.
31,000?
It's a little high, but we don't know until we see the new census. It's close to a population of a house district.
Just, do we know what the purpose of reaching down, you think just geographical area is the reason for reaching?
I think he's just trying to basically, so if you look at Alamogordo, for starters, that's where the bulk of the population is. You can see all the streets there. And that's not enough population to get to 30,000 people. So he's then moving up the mountain chain to pick up communities that are within the communities of interest of Alamogordo till he gets to around 33,000. Some of that area, again, doesn't have much population, but it's a big geography. And then he's conforming it to the precinct boundary.
If you overlaid the current district to the proposed district, what would it look like? What would the differences look like?
Well, the difference is that that whole area in Cloudcroft would be in Senate District 54. So you look and remember, I'm colorblind, so I have trouble. So 54 is coming up from Carlsbad, if you can zoom out. So 54 is starting in Carlsbad, and then it's stretching all the way through rural Otero County and picking up Cloudcroft. So he's saying, keep Cloudcroft in 51.
And Tularosa, which I spent a fair amount of time in Alamogordo. I mean, Tularosa and Alamogordo are almost inseparable, but they're in different districts.
They're in different districts, and because the sum of that population would be too much. So look at 54 going from Carlsbad to Cloudcroft. It's basically his point. And actually 54 includes Artesia too. And so this is an area of the map that you might want to consider cleaning up a little. And again, 54 may not have to, under a status quo plan, 54 might not have to stretch this far into Cloudcroft if the populations hold up for Leonetti. So it might take care of itself on a status quo oriented plan. When I say a status quo oriented plan, I'm saying that if you have us design plans that start with what we have and then make fixes to them, as compared to plans that just take hold different concepts. This plan started in 61. This plan started, the current plan starts with Eunice and Jal and goes up Lee County to builds a minority district, and the bulk of Hobbs is in District 62. So then, you know, after covering Lee County with 61 and 62 and 66, partly in Lovington, it starts moving into Carlsbad to build a district. 55 is mostly a Carlsbad district. And 54 takes part of Carlsbad and Artesia and goes all the way to Cloudcroft to pick up enough population. So that's what happens. You start in a corner and you start building, trying to take into account areas of communities of interest, but sometimes on the edges, ending up closer to the sphere of influence of Alamogordo rather than the sphere of influence of Carlsbad. And that's what he's talking about. He wants Cloudcroft to be in 51, not in 54. That's, yeah.
The questions on that concept?
Yeah, it's tricky. Well,
what's the next map on districting?
and I wrote down my notes based on the title, so if it's called Equal New Mexico.
Yes, that's right.
So Equal New Mexico, the stated goal within his text is to unite communities of common interests and political ties. He or she, I don't recall who, Alejandra. Okay. She wanted to unite communities with common interests and economic ties while creating one smaller district that encompasses the city of Albuquerque and surroundings. Also keeps Native American reservations like the Navajo together. Okay, well, her stated goal is to unite communities of common interest. So then you have to say to yourself as committee members, we have the east side of New Mexico, and it's with Santa Fe and Taos. So you need to ask yourself whether that is uniting common interests and political ties. Eastern New Mexico, and then Santa Fe and Taos. Then on the western side of the district, it includes Las Cruces, Rio Rancho, Indian Country, Rio Arriba County. So that's sort of speaking against what our witness was saying, which was nervous about it, putting Rio Arriba. So this is an east-west configuration. And then there's an Albuquerque district. If we can zoom into Albuquerque, under this plan, we see that Albuquerque is split three ways. Basically, the heights of Albuquerque, I'm sorry, no, this plan does create an Albuquerque district. So it's Albuquerque and Moriarty and Estancia, pretty much. It is, for the most part, a Bernalillo County district, with some exceptions. Cañoncito is not in that Albuquerque district. Isleta is not in that Albuquerque district. Valencia County is not in there. So it's an Albuquerque Moriarty district, speaking generally, and then splitting the other two districts on an east-west configuration. And so in the drafter's opinion, this united common political ties.
So am I correct in understanding that essentially regardless of what it does to other Native communities, that it keeps the Navajo Nation together. Because this letter would go into.
It keeps the Navajos together. It keeps Jicarilla in it. It keeps the Sandoval Pueblos in it. It keeps the Cibola County Pueblos in it, Acoma, Laguna, Zuni. It does unify much of the Native American territories in the Western District. That's correct. It yes, it does. Not all. It could have stuck Kenyon's Tahajali, excuse me. It could have stuck Tahajali in there, which is that most Western Bernalillo County precinct, but that was probably an oversight.
But that reach over around Espanola.
It includes Espanola in the Western District, but not Taos or Santa Fe. So Espanola, Rio Arriba County, Native American areas, Rio Rancho, Las Cruces. They're in that Western configuration district. The Albuquerque district is pretty tight. You could zoom in a little more in the Albuquerque area. The Edgewood fleet precincts that we heard about being split, they're not split here. All the Edgewood precincts are in the Albuquerque district. All of Sandoval, no, not all of Sandoval, parts of Rio Rancho are in the Albuquerque district, where you see that green, is that green?
Yeah.
Yeah, so some of the older part of Rio Rancho's in the Albuquerque district. Isleta goes to the other district, as does all of Valencia County. So it unifies most Native Americans. Of course, you have the northern Pueblos also. You got some of the northern Pueblos in Taos. They're not in it, but the northern Pueblos of Rio Arriba are in the Native Americans.
Mr. Chairman, Brian, you're saying the Taos Pueblos are in with the Isleta Pueblo?
No. So yes, Taos Pueblo is in, see how the district wraps up into Valencia and gets at Isleta. So actually, Taos Pueblo and Isleta and Tahajali are all in that Western district, assuming my color.
That's right, yeah.
I have trouble with colors. Yes, so there are some native Pueblos that are, Jicarilla goes on the west, but Taos, Isleta, Tahajali, I guess Tezuque, Powake will also go in the one on the east.
So a total of 4 or 5 other Pueblos?
Yeah, some of the Pueblos are right. So they're taking, yes. The remaining Pueblos are unified in the Western district. The Albuquerque one doesn't have this level. Goes with the western side.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So how many Pueblos would be in a different district under this plan?
Well, in any plan, there are some Pueblos that usually fall outside. But if in a northern configuration, the Taos Pueblo and the Santa Fe Pueblos like Nave and Suzuki and Powake would fall in to a northern district.
If I may add, also Hickory Club, just.
Hickory East, yes, would be the western one.
And then Mescalero would be down in the east.
Mescalero is right there. It would also be unified, if you will, in the western congressional district. Oh, eastern, I'm sorry, eastern one.
Out of curiosity, what are the population deviations? Does it report that?
Yeah, it's there.
I can't see it.
Oh, sorry.
Populations are pretty good, but they're, off by, 600 from the smallest to the largest. And Michael sent an email saying there might be some contiguity.
So Justice Travis, the blue is 686,178, the yellow is 686,698, and the turquoise is 686,303.
So it's showing a maximum population deviation of 0.04%, so 0.04%.
Sure. Mr. Sunroof, actually, I meant to ask this question earlier. You mentioned in 2011 that there was 0 deviation among the congressional districts. Was that maintaining all precincts, or did?
We had to split 2 precincts to comply to the judge's request. Okay. At the end, we split a couple of precincts to do it. And that was to accommodate the judge who said he wanted that. In a case where the judge is selecting the plan, oftentimes they set higher bars than the rules. So the judge just said, I want 0 deviation. So everyone said, okay. But on the plan that was passed, I think at the end we split up Mortalis precinct and then a precinct maybe in Cibola, just to get it down to 0 deviation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And any plan that you consider, if you like a concept, we can always move along a concept. And then if it has legs and you're thinking of presenting, adopting it as one of your considerations, we could make that final tiny fix at the end. If you like a concept and then just want us to bring it down to 0, we could always do that later rather than bringing every plan to 0. That's just an idea. Because this one's off by 600, 0.04% deviation is not bad, but.
Is that the northern New Mexico communities?
Well, yeah, I wasn't speaking to the concept. It's up to you to decide this plan, brings together more Native Americans on the west side and splits north central New Mexico, unifies eastern New Mexico. So in a plan that's a north-south configuration, you're splitting eastern New Mexico, right? In a north-south configuration, northeastern New Mexico goes in the northern district and southeastern New Mexico goes in the southern district. This plan unifies the eastern New Mexico as one of its qualities. But it splits in half north central New Mexico. And that's what we were talking about earlier, about different plans have different attributes that then impact the neighboring counties. Michael tells us there is a slight contiguity issue in the plan when used, but those things can always be fixed.
I agree with Brian's point that, we can't think too much about the population deviations in this map because they're not based on 2020 data, right? And so I think it's important that we think conceptually, with regard to the congressional district map, whether it's in the interest of, the committee and New Mexico, and based on the comment that we received, whether we want to continue to have, as we do now, an Albuquerque-based district, and then a northern district and southern district, or whether we want a different concept such as this one. We have an East District and a West District with an Albuquerque district. And I believe there's another submission that we'll get to that doesn't follow either of those concepts. It kind of 3 different triangles that spread out from Albuquerque. So I think because we don't have that 2020 data yet, that we sort of think towards conceptually, do we want a north-south? Do we want a east-west? Do we want something different? And these, preliminary maps that have been provided are very helpful to be thinking about that.
Anything else on this map? Next.
Okay, are we going to discuss any comments or just the ones that have maps?
Let's go to the maps.
In looking, I was puzzled by this.
Tell us which map you're at.
Oh,
So this is ZXCB, ZXCB. I think somebody was just messing around.
yeah, I think this person said this is a test.
Yeah.
And although we didn't look at it, it seems to be just a test. But what it does is it just puts Hidalgo, Luna, and Grant south of Silver City in one spot. But he just says it's a test, and I don't know if it's anything more than that. Because it didn't have the right populations for the House, Senate, or I think it was just a test. Okay. I've got one called balanced plan. I assume it's the same thing. Okay, yeah, this is interesting. So the person who.
Brian, can I interrupt for a second? That I believe that whoever's created the submission created an updated submission. So I would think that we could disregard this one.
I think this is the updated one.
Corrected. Okay, there is. Correct. I didn't see corrected earlier. Sorry about that.
And my comments were basically on the original, but I will look, I don't see anything big difference compared. So first of all, this author of this plan made a comment that he used the Senate districts as building blocks. So rather than precincts, he started with Senate districts. Notice what color is the corner, the southwest. Yellow. Notice the yellow district. And notice the fact that it goes all the way into the blue district. That's because that's a Senate district. That looks like Senate District 33, Senator Burt's district. That goes from Roswell to Alamogordo. But having said that, he used Senate districts rather than precincts as the building blocks. But this plan, stated by the author, uses voter registration statistics to come up with similar percentage of Democrats, Republicans, and independents in each district. So what he did was he called gerrymandering anything that didn't put percentage of Democrats, Republicans. So this sort of goes against your rules. Your rules say you can't design plans based on voter registration. This plan designs plans to equalize the percentage of Democrats in each district, Republicans in each district, and independents, and feels that any plan that doesn't do it that way is a gerrymandered plan. So that's his opinion of the word gerrymander. And so one could argue well, I'm just telling you that that's how he designed the plans to equalize based on voter registration. While we're here though, it does split Albuquerque 3 ways. And so we see that the height, and I'm going to speak in generalities, the heights of Albuquerque go with the east side. The North Valley goes with northern New Mexico. And the South Valley and West Side go with the Southwestern Congressional District. So I guess the first thing to consider is, did this plan follow your rules in terms of how it was designed? And then the issue of how you feel about this plan, taking parts of Albuquerque and including it in 3 different districts. Oh, by the way, there's a population deviation of 300,000. 50 through 60 through 70, 50. Oh, that might be fixed a little. 270,000 deviation between the smallest district and the largest district. Also 22%, 26,000 people were unassigned to any one of the districts. But basically, Heights with the east side, North Valley with the northern district, South Valley and West Side with the Southwest district. 22% total deviation between max and smallest and largest. I can give you more details on it if you want.
No, thank you. Not for me anyway.
It just violates the rules in numerous ways, but that's a good example. It's a good for us to see an example.
No, and it's interesting that his perspective was, and the way to get rid of gerrymandering is by equalizing the voter registration of every district. That's his definition of gerrymandering, but it's interesting. Okay, Richard Mason produced an area that he feels is a common interest. And what he did was he sort of highlighted Rio Rancho. But he also, so you can see Rio Rancho there where it says Rio Rancho. But the district also does pull in Corrales and the town of Bernalillo, and 2 Indian pueblos, Native American pueblos, Santa Ana and Zia. So he might be saying he wants all of that in a congressional district. When it comes to legislative districts, I'm not sure that he would necessarily want the Santa Ana and the Zia pueblos within the Rio Rancho legislative district. I suspect that wasn't his intention. It may have been just that he pulled in Zia and Santa Ana, or maybe wanted to show that should all be in the northern congressional district. But so we're looking at him holding Rio Rancho and Corrales and Bernalillo and 2 Native American pueblos into one community of interest. But I think I qualified it probably as to what he might have been thinking. Now, Rio Rancho is an example of a community of interest where people in Rio Rancho might say, don't split me up 10 ways. But of course, any city that's larger than the size of a House district or Senate district is going to be split. And so it's just a matter of, remembering that Rio Rancho is a community district, you might want to think about splitting it less than more. And that would be something to consider. But the area there is probably 100,000 people. $100,008. Okay,
Next.
okay, here's a nice this text that explains the commonalities of interest that are included in the international district in Albuquerque. And the way this was drawn, you will hear different people describe the boundaries of the international district. But basically people say from San Mateo to Wyoming, and basically they say south of Lomas to Gibson. That's a basic area of the international district. And so if you wanted to hold this area whole, it has a population that's roughly similar to a House seat, but we won't know until we see the census population. But, you know, there are some House districts that could be split at Central Avenue. If you wanted to hold this one right up to Lomas and keep the whole international district intact, that would be your prerogative. And we have to wait until we see the census counts, but they're probably going to be relatively close. In the current House plan, the international district is split. One of the House districts goes up to Louisiana and then picks up from Louisiana to Wyoming, districts 19 and 21, if I recall. And so there is a current split in the international district between 19 and 21. So the Trumbull area is going into 21, 19 only goes into Louisiana. So if you brought 19 over, it's Cheryl William Stapleton district incidentally. And so that is something the populations match up pretty good. We won't know for sure. And the Senate side, Senate 21, because that's 50,000 people, the international district as defined here is pretty close. Not that it's off by a couple precincts. And of course, on the Senate side, the international district would have to include more than just the international district, because that's only 30,000 out of 50,000. And so there would be discussion about which direction to move from there.
I would be interested in that concept of the international district being singular. Let's just take a look at what the data shows, and we'll listen to folks from that area, see if they want to be split or if they want to be united.
Okay.
And can you tell me about the Morelos district?
Well, yeah. On the Senate side, the Morelos district is in 12, and it covers 12 covers parts of the South Valley up to Coors, and then crosses over the river and includes downtown and Morelos. It's getting up to Lomas, University of Mexico. Could you zoom in a little more on 12? Yeah, 4th Street, Broadway. Yeah, it's wholly contained in a district. There, 4th Street. Oh, I'm sorry, Morelos. I was thinking Martinez Town. Morelos is, yeah, wholly contained right below the number 12. And it takes that 2nd Avenue and 4th Street corridor right up into, you know, downtown and into the near North Valley. Although 12 is a district that starts like Coors in the South Valley, goes into downtown Morelos, then goes up to the University of New Mexico, the precinct 358, the dorms, and before it's done, it goes up to Carlisle and Candelaria. So it's covering a number of regions. And, you know, that is an interesting district.
That's the House or the Senate?
That's the Senate.
In the House?
And the House, District 10 is a South Valley district that then goes up If you go further, well, yeah. So the other way. C14. You know, Borealis has different definitions, but its north end tends to be coal and its south end tends to be Cesar Chavez by the Hispano Cultural Center. But Borealis is covered pretty well in 14, in District 14. 5 Points, South Valley, crosses the river, picks up Borealis. Some people think of Borealis going as far as Woodward Drive, but most people cut it off around by the cultural center. So it's in one district for the most part.
Thank you.
So yeah, the international district, that's many people's definition of what it is. Other people will quibble, but we'll watch the populations, it sounds like, and see.
And we don't have any sense in that district, whether it's grown or it hasn't, or.
There's one part of it that has. There's been some infill. There's been some apartments added. But I don't think that much.
Yeah.
You know, that includes the state fairgrounds and the like, you know, think about, it's not that much infill opportunities there. Where the infill opportunities come on Eubank and by the base.
The dot that's there in the middle by Birch under Wyoming, I just wanted to know what the dot is. Do you know?
I think the person who built this is calling that the southeastern corner of the International District Community of Interest. It says this is also part of the IDCOI comprising the most southeastern corner of Gibson and Wyoming. So they just put that red dot there.
Why did they do it?
They're saying that's also part of the International District. I wonder if the precinct was too big to get what they wanted in there.
And they did cross over Wyoming there too. They did cross over to Eubank, not all the way from Lomas, but they did like Club Road Southeast. And Brittany was just saying that's because that's one whole precinct. And so they probably had no choice.
And then just for my own knowledge, the area around Bullhead and by the VA is not the International District?
Well, it's not residential, that whole block there. Of course, the VA itself, but not according to this definition where they cut it off at Gibson. But that's an example of what happens in districting. If you like to keep an area whole, then you see what the population is. And then you add a little or subtract a little to make it work and come up with the closest area that might fit. Or take out a part that you wanted to keep in. And that's where you play on the edges.
Well, the overlay concept that the chair was mentioning earlier would be so great. If we could actually see some of these maps, but overlay the current setup.
Yeah. Once we build the new, get the new data, that's possible.
Another example.
What I'm seeing is everything else is just commentary. Is that what you're seeing also?
Yeah, those are the maps that have been submitted thus far on the online portal. Okay.
Oh, there's one more. It's House Congressional Districts.
Okay. Okay, let's just see. There seems to be a growing tension between northern New Mexico and southern. We are all New Mexico. I think we drive the congressional districts this way to help soften this growing tension. After 10 years, there's growing tension between east and west. We could go back and go north south. Also, I think the House congressional district should be contained within county lines. Okay. So this person is concerned about tension between northern and southern New Mexico. So rather than building districts that divide the congressional districts by northern and southern New Mexico, which the author feels could promote that tension. What this plan would do, the way I see it, it would include diverse communities of interest in the same congressional district. So we would see Eastern New Mexico unified. We'd see Otero County is in it. And it would go up and include Santa Fe and actually the Sandoval Native American Pueblos. So it would be taking a lot of different interests. Conservative Eastern New Mexico with Santa Fe, 7 or 8 Pueblos in Sandoval in one district.
Sandra, if you open it in District, it will show you those boundaries. If it's on the software.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I got a note from one of our team members too. Yeah, so this is the existing boundaries. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Right. And so this is existing boundaries. So currently we have basically a northern district, a southern district, and an Albuquerque Turns County district, and with some exceptions. And this would be, again, an eastern and western configuration. And it would be, the objective is to include diverse interests in the same district to elect somebody who doesn't have a special interest but would want to represent everybody. I think I've read that in part of the text. I think it was part of it. And then we would have an eastern, a western district as well. That would be Las Cruces, the entire southwest quadrant. It would include Catron and Socorro, and it would include Cibola and Valencia and McKinley. Native American countries, Jicarilla, Rio Arriba County would all be in that district. So it's unifying a lot of the Taos, Pueblo, Jicarilla, Apache, Navajo, Laguna, Acoma, Zuni, a lot of Native Americans in that eastern configuration. The Sandoval Pueblos would be more in the western configuration with Mescalero. And then there'd be an Albuquerque district. Can we zoom in a little? Yeah, the Albuquerque would include Bernalillo County, Torrance County. It's actually split between Bernalillo and County and the Valencia County side of it in that plan. But a part of their goal was to, it's part of their goals, and that's what many counties.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the objectives was not to split that many counties, but in the course of doing so, it's led as 2/3 Valencia County, 1/3 Bernalillo County. But yeah, so I guess Rather than communities of interest, it's put together diverse interests, so they have to be sensitive to all the different interests in one's district. While we're here and you're looking at the current boundaries of the current congressional district, I want to make a point. One thing to think about, you know, whether you go status quo on Congress or not, or do a combination of things, there's a couple things. If you zoom in more to Albuquerque Metro. So current districts, you've got, you know, Albuquerque, Torrance, but look at that sliver in Valencia County that is by Meadow Lake. That's in CD1. It goes back to 1991. The judges in 2000 and 2001, they passed lease change plans. So every 10 years, the judge just changes the plan as little as possible for lease. That little sliver in the Albuquerque Congressional District could be something in whatever plans you consider. Really doesn't make much sense being in CD1 anymore because it keeps narrowing. It's basically Meadow Lake. It's in the Albuquerque district, and the rest, you know, you might want to consider that being in Valencia County. And then on the top in Albuquerque, there's parts of Ventana Ranch, maybe even a Paradise Hills precinct that still goes into the Northern Congressional District. You know, you might want to consider that. Thing's also been a sliver that's been shrinking because of lease change plans over the years. You might want to consider letting all the Paradise Hills and all the Ventana Ranch be in the Albuquerque district rather than the north. It's a vestige from 1991 that keeps shrinking, regardless of what you might do to the map. You heard one of the witnesses while we're here on Edgewood. Note she said Edgewood was split. Notice where Edgewood is. You've got two of the precincts in blue. Those are in the Albuquerque district, and then two of the precincts next to it, green, in the Northern district. That's a reference to what she was saying about Edgewood being split. So the first congressional district, as it currently is, you know, it does include the town of Bernalillo in that Albuquerque district. It does include Casitas. Just wanted to point that out. Go south a little. Isleta on both sides of Bernalillo County is in the Southern district. And that is something that at the time the Isleta Pueblo had no problem with. They had been that way 10 years before, and they told us they were okay with it at the time. Just wanted to point out a couple of features of the first congressional, the current plan, just a couple of quirks of it.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
That sliver also includes El Cerro and El Cerro Mission, does it not?
Yes.
And the other part of CD1 or CD2, whichever way you want to look at it, splits Bosque Farm, splits half of Valencia County, correct? Down the Rio Grande
The congressional plan, or?
Yeah, the congressional plan.
So let's pull Valencia County. Well, Valencia County, oh, you're saying as it moves closer to the Rio Grande? Yeah, no, it gets a little, it does split a little community. I can't remember exactly there.
And I remember, I mean, way back there, Mr. Chairman, Brian, that was Joe Skeen wanted to make sure that they got Bosque Farms, absolutely wanted Bosque Farms. Because they turn out 99% voter turnout there, generally speaking.
Well, yeah.
It's a more conservative area than other places in Valencia County, although we're turning more
I
conservative.
think Bosque did end up at CD2 in this last go around. 2 times ago, that was the case.
Yeah.
2 times ago. Not anymore. This time it was just, again, the judge didn't want to select, the judge went with a status quo plan 10 years ago and 20 years ago. So we just adjusted the precincts. So the sliver in Valencia kept getting smaller. The sliver by Paradise Hills and Ventana Ranch kept getting smaller. That just became less communities of interest there.
Mr. Chairman and Brian, you know, and this is just the beginning of the maps that are going to come in. But I just remember one of the individuals who testified today, Mr. Deerdeck, I believe. And he was talking about a more moderate than a radical plan. And I guess from the past, and as I recall, just like you're saying, the judges don't want to change a whole lot. Try to keep it as even or status quo as they can with the least amount of change. The thing that always bothers me about the congressional districts and the legislative districts, and I've always had a concern, and Senator Jennings way back then, is Mescalero and how they're an island unto themselves. But if we were able to make Chaparral an island unto itself, I don't know how or why we couldn't make Mescalero the same type of thing if the numbers come out. If that's at all a possibility. I'm just trying to figure out a way, because you dilute their voting power in the direction that they have to go, because there is no real direction for them to go other than Roswell or Alamogordo, right?
Yeah, we never split Mescalero, but yeah, they are isolated as a Native American tribe from other Native American tribes under a status quo plan.
Yeah, and that's kind of like Isleta in a sense. I mean, where they're kind of isolated because there's really no, other pueblos that they have any thing in common with, for the most part. I mean, I know they do have some, but.
Right.
And hopefully we're gonna hear from them, right?
Well, and last time, as I said, they were okay with being in the Southern District. There would have been a way of getting them Cibola goes south, so no.
Right.
They were okay with it. I think they had a good working relationship with the member of Congress. And, we did touch base with them at the time.
No, Mr. Chairman, I remember they were fine with most everything, but things are changing quickly.
Right, sure.
As we speak.
Sure.
So I just right now the things I'm saying, and we're just barely touching the tip of the iceberg with all of the maps that we probably will get in at the time. I'm just thinking more of that overlay that the chairman talked about, so that we can see and a moderate approach rather than a radical approach. I just think that might be where we need to start heading. I mean, we can look at all of these things, and I can't tell half of the times if it's a congressional map or a legislative map in terms of what we're looking at. And maybe we ought to break it down into whether they're congressional maps and we look at just those alone, legislative maps, and also the education, right? The school board.
Right.
Because it's a little bit confusing to me.
As we get more feedback, Mr. Chairman, that's a good idea to, not rather than taking them in order, group them into House, Senate, Congress, so that we can keep the same mindset going.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Brian.
I know we have lawyers to talk to, but don't other redistricting committees or redistricting for states get into trouble when they do radical changes?
You don't necessarily get into trouble when you do radical changes. You get into trouble if you do radical gerrymander changes. And so, but I'll tell you right now, if you look at Texas or Arizona or North Carolina, what they call gerrymandering and what New Mexico calls gerrymandering are two very different things. They district at the block level, and they drew plans that boundaries go for literally 20 feet long. I mean, compared to, we have northern New Mexico, southern New Mexico, and Albuquerque right now. Other states take it to a whole new level and then push it as much as they can. But a status quo plan, I mean, one of your directions to us could be draw status quo plans that adjust based on the population shifts. And then if you have other ideas, we can do that too. Of course, members of the public are going to be submitting plans, and they may come up with brilliant ideas that you love on their own.
Well, the way I designed the agenda, and I thought a little bit clearer about this presentation, we would have broken it down the way I have us discussing it, beginning with Congress. We'll talk about congressional plans, then we'll move to state Senate plans and the state House plans, and the Public Education Commission. We're just getting started. I agree with Member Sanchez that we're just getting started. But I think we should organize ourselves to just try to focus on Congress, then going to the state Senate, state House. And at some point, somebody's going to be interested in the Public Education Commission, because that's our responsibility. But I do think we can, as members, if you want, just let research and polling know if you want to try to move areas around, if you want to try to isolate Mescalero to get input from them about what they like. I think we can suggest the concept so that it's on the table for discussion. So I would urge the committee to think about doing that. Sonny, is there anybody on Zoom with their hand raised?
Not at this time, Justice Chavez.
Well, maybe we should move on to number 8, congressional plans, and I just invite the committee members to go ahead and make, if you have any ideas for concepts and you want to put them forth, that would be a good time. I know we're getting started, so maybe we need to gel a little bit. But put that on the table as item number 8 on the agenda. Anybody?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll make a comment. That's okay.
Sure.
I'm not sure I have an idea yet. I think it's too early. I certainly want to hear more input. And I certainly appreciate, Member Sanchez and his comment of, I'm going to say loose change. It's not the word to use, but that's, and I guess I see it from the voter's perspective in that regard. And a voter has a connection to the person they voted for, perhaps, and, do not want to lose that. So I recognize that. At the same time, I'm also thinking if there is a time to change, and I'm not advocating that we do, but if there is a time, this is it. The first year of the Redistricting Commission, if there is a time to make a change, and maybe it's not at congressional level, maybe it's with Mescalero. But if there is a time, I would say we're in a pretty unique situation here, and we should think about that. In 10 years, I think it will be more difficult for the commission to make a significant change, a dramatic change.
So if I may say one other thing. So when the judges 10 years ago and 20 years ago went with a least change plan, it was because they saw 1991 as the last time that there was a plan that was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. They saw that as the expression based on the law. And so the judges didn't feel comfortable selecting a plan that deviated much from the last expression of legislative and executive intent. So they took 10 years later and made some nibbles to make the population adjust. 10 years later, some nibbles. So basically you're looking at the 1994 plan that gets adjusted time in a tiny way. So yeah, it's been a long time since someone actually looked at the districts other than what the judge told us to do, which was make as small as change as possible, because 1991 was the last expression of legislative and executive intent.
It seemed like radical change to any of the districts, since we're not an elected body, is something that the public would have to say. We want a radical change. I mean, there would have to be overwhelming support for radical change from the current districts. Otherwise, what we're hearing, and I appreciate that Mr. Block has hung out this entire time sitting here listening to us, where it seems to make more sense that Alamogordo move out into cloud crops versus, some kind of big radical change to everything that's being done. I really appreciate what Mr. Durdek said. I guess on some level, we're going to have to fall back to our, what we understand. But North New Mexico is a community. Yeah, I would think people would really have a problem with splitting up Northern New Mexico. But I don't know. I think we should be listening But I just think that we're imposing something on people, all right? If we're doing radical change without the public jumping up and saying, this is what we want.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm inclined to agree with Lisa's comments that unless there's overwhelming public consensus to change the general composition of our 3 congressional districts, I'm inclined to, draw districts that, we have one centered around Albuquerque and we have a northern district and a southern district. And if we travel around the state and the people of New Mexico feel otherwise, then I'm certainly open to otherwise. But I think that's the concept that we should start with.
I think all that's very true. But by the same token, I really don't want to discourage members of the public from proposing these sort of maps that go longitudinally as opposed to horizontally. I think we just want input from the public and we will assess it as best we can. It's the first meeting, so I expect that there will be many more maps that will be submitted. I just don't want to discourage the public from submitting them based on preliminary comments we're making. But I think what y'all have said is reasonable. But we might have a large majority of communities saying they want to split or be radical. Anything else on congressional maps? The state Senate, anybody have any thoughts about state?
Can I ask one question just real quick of Mr. Sandrock? So as far as population growth is concerned, and I know you can only give us projections because we don't have the data for sure, but when it comes to the congressional maps, I mean, are you seeing I didn't look at it in kind of a holistic way. Are you seeing population growth or decrease in any particular congressional district?
Well, we haven't studied that, and we could break down to a more precise level, but if you think about it, the Northern District has Rio Rancho and Santa Fe. Rio Rancho's grown quite a bit, and Santa Fe didn't grow that much, but it's a big population center. There'll be some change. Albuquerque Congressional District, that's Albuquerque. It's had only 2.9% growth, but that's a lot of people, 2.9% of a big base. Southern New Mexico, Lee and Eddie, it looks like they've done pretty well. And Las Cruces, again, had some growth. So each congressional district had some center that had decent growth. So we're not expecting some radical difference. Sure, there'll be some.
That answers my question.
Okay.
With, I don't know the exact answer.
Yeah, offset by San Juan, but the San Juan issue is more of a legislative issue. You know, the congressional, they had their population centers in each, so.
So what I'm hearing you say is that no district gained or lost a tremendous amount of population. There may be a little bit of movement, but not anything that's going to be drastic.
Right, there will be movement, it won't be drastic.
Justice, could I say something?
Certainly.
So I want to support the comments that Ms. Curtis made, and but I want to say it a little bit differently because I guess I want to talk in support of the word radical, you know, and I don't want to get into a semantic, you know, whatever fight or argument or whatever, but my understanding is that the literal definition is, you know, a return to roots. And so I think the more we listen and be open, I don't want to be risk averse either. So I think as several people have mentioned, you know, this is an opportunity. And I also think there's things happening in our country that we need to, you know, take seriously this moment that we've been given and the responsibility that we've taken on, and that there is if we can really build this on listening to people, then maybe we can reclaim that, that word and what it means to be radical. So I just want to put that out there.
Yes. So Mr. Sanderoff, and you and I kind of discussed this a little bit. 10 years ago, we saw seats gained in Rio Rancho, House seats. We saw a Senate seat shift out of Roswell. Are we going to see any shifts like that with the legislative districts with any of the growth or decrease in population throughout the state?
We don't have the population data yet, the county or the district level. We don't think that would happen. We do feel that there's some excess population sitting on the north end of the west side in the Rio Rancho area. There might be as much as 40% of a Senate seat sitting there, excess population. And so, but 10 years ago, there were seats that were 200% too large, and there was enough excess population for new seats to emerge, both Senate and House seats. That's much less likely to happen, to be needed. You could probably find a way of dispersing that population to other areas that need it. But there will be west side seats. The boundaries will shrink because they have too much population. And then we have to find a place for that excess population. Does it go down the west side and toward the South Valley? We probably don't want to move Rio Rancho seats into the Native American districts since I live in Body Strait. Does it move toward Grants? Does it move across the Rio Grande to the Heights? That's where the endless hours come in to try to figure out what makes sense, because it's that excess population really has no great place to go right now. Because it's not enough to let a whole new seat emerge. When you have 100% deviation, let the seat just emerge where it belongs. But if it's just a half a seat, you have to figure out what to do.
So, Mr. Chairman, based on that question, you're just going to move that population base into other districts. That's what has to happen.
It has to happen. I mean, if district boundaries will shrink because they have too much population, that will leave other population sitting there.
So if you're moving the west down into the South Valley, then you're going into the Isleta area and parts of Valencia County as well. I would assume.
It depends on how far the ripple effect occurs. It's possible.
But it is, Mr. Chairman, it is a ripple effect all the way through.
It is a ripple effect. It could be spread in all directions, or it could be spread in one direction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, if there's another region that's lacking population, like there are probably some Southwest Mesa seats that have too much population, but probably some other South Valley seats that need population. In that case, they work together in a great marriage.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Brian.
Well, while we're talking about Senate districts, I guess probably now's as good a time as any. Is it possible for you to draw maps that show all communities of interest that we hear throughout these August meetings without regard to incumbency? We just draw them and overlay them where they would overlap so that we could start to understand ripple effects. Is that possible?
We could draw a map that shows you all the communities of interest that have been presented in. Are you saying then find a way of making a statewide map out of that, or just showing a map where all the overlapping community interests? The answer to that is yes.
I think it would help me. Hopefully it would help the committee too, just to see all the overlays that could potentially happen from listening to different communities talk about their communities of interest and how it might affect other districts.
Some may suggest communities of interest that are absolutely in conflict with each other, that just absolutely can't work together.
Like the chair was talking about the gentleman from Galisteo, right? So if we drew that community of interest in with the group that, he feels is more like related and out, seeing what that does to the surrounding areas populations.
Yeah, Right, he thinks that half of his House seat makes sense, and he questions the southern half of it being together. So, but what would have the trick is, if he likes the El Dorado Galisteo side, he thinks that makes good sense, and that's half a district, then we're gonna have to find another half a district to join that to, which will impact 4 Santa Fe districts. But yes, it still is a valuable comment. House District 30 runs from El Dorado. Frankly, he didn't even mention it, actually down to Rio Communities, Williston County. But isn't it funny that the Senate District 39 in the center of the state, Stefanik's district, is also in that same awkward place as House District 50 on the House map. They're both in the center of the state, where sometimes areas just get put together with what's left.
Yeah, the ripple effect ended up in.
The ripple effect happens in the center of the state. The House 50 and Senate 39 are basically that grab bag area that some people feel put together communities that have different interests.
Mr. Sandroff, I've written something, so I have the detail in writing. I can get it to you. But I think it would be helpful for me, and I hope the committee, if, as we think about maps, if we also get some data reports from, and what I'm thinking about is district profiles. And we would have the district numbers. Okay, then we would have the total population included in each district. The population deviation from ideal, so that we can make sure we stay within the 10%. But I also think we should look at the adult populations, total adult Native American, total adult Hispanic, both as a numerical. I would like them both as a numerical expression, but also a percentage. That would be helpful to me. And then adult non-Hispanic, and in that I guess I would include, what you tell me if there's a different way to categorize it, white, Native American, Black, Asian, or other races. Again, as a numerical expression and as a percentage. And then give us a total for the state so that we can see what it looks like totally for the state. And I presume that by adult we mean voting age. Is that correct?
Yes. Okay. It's just got that voting age part.
Right. But to be clear, to make sure we conform with the law, do not include in the district profiles or elsewhere any performance measures or a breakdown of registered voters. You'll have to look at that with the attorney and make sure that we're complying with the VRA. And also, Section 8810 allows us, when feasible, to preserve the core of existing districts. Is it possible for you to give us a report on how many cores of districts were retained?
Yes.
If you get that, that'd be helpful. And then compactness, as you said, there's like 30 different measurements and every one of them is subject to criticism. But I noticed that in the past you relied on REOC and the Polsby-Popper measurements, and those seem to be popular in articles that are written. Could you also include for us compactness measurements for those maps that we're thinking about?
Yes.
Or even the ones we like, the concepts that come through Districtor. And then also boundary splits, like Silver City, it seems to be a big issue, Edgewood, big issue, letting us know which boundaries are actually split, just so that we can think about that and read it as opposed to trying to visualize it. Is that possible?
Yes, and of course the challenge is we've got plans coming in Districtor, which is special software, not ours, and then we've got our software that we use. But yes, we would have to take the Districtor stuff and convert it into spreadsheets and do this and that and run reports, and Denise has been working on that. There are some things in there that are tricky, like the core of the existing district. When people work in Districtor, like we have district numbers 1 through 42 in the Senate, 1 through 70 in the House. And we know the districts by those numbers. And so people in Districtor, when they work, wherever they start their plan, let's say somebody starts in Albuquerque, that becomes District 1, whereas District 1 is really in Farmington. And when it comes to trying to calculate the percentage of a district that maintain the core, we're still working on those challenges to figure out ways of doing that, comparing the districter numbers to the legislative, but we're working on all those things.
Is it possible to work with districtor, move and see if, as soon as they start painting, that will automatically number the district in its current, with its current number?
We have sent them an email with various suggestions. We haven't heard back yet.
Okay. All right.
But they've been, yeah. So there are challenges to some of the things you said, but we're working on them.
Okay, well, just keep us informed.
You know, I think you all received during training these beautiful data tables that take every district, current districts, by the total pop of deviations and percent, a number of Hispanic district, Native Americans, you know, so we've always done it in the past. And so we'll do it. It's easier to do it for the plans we draw than the districtor ones, but yeah, we're working on it.
I'm going to ask about something really specific to that data plan. So I was quite concerned about the presentation we got with prison population. Having had clients in the Milan prison in the past, you know, that population, which is an immigrant population, which is almost exclusively Hispanic, that then gets attributed to that part of the world where it doesn't live, or how the prison population is affecting some of those percentages that you were just talking about. I mean, is there a way to disentangle that information?
Well, first, let me say, yes, it is an issue and it's been discussed by many advocates. And it has the biggest impact on city council and county commission districts. Imagine if you're in a county with 10,000 people and there happens to be a 1,500 population prison sitting in one of those districts. That's taking up a big proportion of the district's population. It's still an issue with the state, and you've heard people say it's a big issue. The idea of reallocating prison population, we would have to get from all of the private prisons and all the state prisons. And the feds would have to get permission to give us addresses where they have their convicts incarcerated in New Mexico prisons. We would have to get the address of where that incarcerated person lived, geocode it, put it into a precinct assignment, recalculate the populations of all the precincts and districts, get their racial information, pull it off in the next number of weeks. I mean, it is being done in lots of cities and counties, and there are even some states giving it a go. Sounds pretty challenging for the legislative to do unless we get tremendous cooperation from all the institutions. Plus, it wouldn't be the people who are incarcerated today, it would be the people who are incarcerated in April of 2020. Because if someone was incarcerated in the last year, they may have done the census form where they were. So it would be, I totally see the point, and many people make compelling arguments. Can we pull it off in time?
Well, it's like if we're going to consider the only adult voters, except this plan is going to be in place for 10 years, right? So there are a whole bunch of people who aren't adults that will become adults that will be able to vote. We're considering prisoners that can't vote by definition, okay, where they're at, most likely. But we're considering that as part of the population for determining who can vote. Okay, so I'm just challenging the concepts about whether that's really a logical place to be making decisions from.
Well, the concept of total population is you have to calculate the population of the districts based on total population, including children. That part's not debatable. But yeah, the part about allocation of prisoners to their last known address prior to incarceration is a movement that's happening around the nation that people are discussing. There's been some success at the city and county level. I know California was giving it a go, and I heard they were running into trouble, but of course they're a lot bigger than we are. But if you were to even consider that, the first challenge would be the logistical one.
Well, I mean, like, so my example that I used, and I can't keep up with what CCA, what the private prisons are doing at any given moment, okay? But I mean, if they're literally housing only immigrants, okay, who cannot vote, because that's the prison they are, right? But that Hispanic ratio is being put in to the thought process for that district so that people are not, afoul of some Voting Rights Act issue. It just doesn't seem appropriate. I mean, there seems to be a logical issue to this. I understand the idea of not allocating somebody to Rio Arriba County, or, we have prisoners from Oklahoma, that are in the prison population here in New Mexico, and vice versa. All right, but when we actually have prisons that are made up solely of people that are immigrants, then it doesn't seem fair to allot that ethnic group to the percentage of the ethnic group that votes in that district when they can't ever vote.
If they were there for a month on some transporting issue, they probably weren't counted in the census because it's where you usually live and sleep most of the time. But if a person's been incarcerated in jail for 6 months or a year, yeah, they would have been counted there.
It's an interesting problem. So I'm sure we don't have to reinvent the wheel on any of it. I think that this part, especially the immigrant issue, would have been thought about. So I'd be interested in looking at that.
Absolutely.
Definitely not an easy issue. I don't think the prison population, there's even one suggestion that we simply look at the population. One of my other volunteer activities is chairing the Sentencing Commission. I think we could get you data pretty quick that as of August of last year, and I think the new data will probably come out at the end of August of this year, for how many numbers in jail, how many numbers in our prisons. I think it's gone down really because of COVID in a lot of the release issues. If we could get that data. One of the recommendations is take the population and divide it amongst the districts. Seems like a policy question to me that probably the legislature should deal with and not us, but I think we should discuss it so that the legislature is aware of the issue and maybe they think it through, or maybe we propose an option for them to consider. But I don't think it's a simple issue, but I can try to get the information that Curtis would like to see about the jail populations.
Mr. Chair, just a further technical consideration, which I know some of my colleagues in other states are pursuing this to allocate prisoners, not necessarily we're proposing, but to just simply allocate prisoners at their last known address. Mr. Sanderoff outlined the technical challenges. A further technical consideration that will plague any initiative like this is that the facility level data that you obtain, even if it's from April 1st, 2020, is inevitably not going to match the facility level data that the Census Bureau reports next month. And so we'd have to consider how to account for that. I mean, you can, yeah, there's several ways that could be addressed, but it is a further technical challenge.
Anything else on prison populations?
Nobody said this was going to be easy.
Right, exactly. There's one other issue I want to take up, but I want the committee's advice on it. We are under Section 8C2 allowed to consider the residence of the incumbents. I know in the past you put stars where the residency happens to be. I don't see a problem with us seeing the stars on the maps that we're thinking about, because we have to think about whether or not we're carrying them whether or not we can do so based on other criteria. I think I would also like for the maps to show the stars where the incumbents reside. I don't think we're running afoul of any rules by doing so, but I want the thoughts of the committee.
I certainly agree with that. I don't know how we meet the other edict.
That makes sense to me.
Joaquin or Robert?
That makes sense. And I would like that data available. I do think that the law and my own values subordinate that consideration to all our other considerations. And I would therefore personally, if I'm drawing a map, I would want to draw it without considering incumbency and then turn it on and see what we've done. And if it's possible to then tweak around the edges to not pair incumbents, then so be it. But I personally don't want that to be a predominant factor or a predominant value when we're drawing districts.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to what Robert just said. I'd support what the caveat he just gave.
Anybody else? Yeah, I don't view it as inconsistent with what Robert's saying. It's just we have a right to know and we ought to see it. We just wait. It's one of the considerations, but it is largely subordinate to any other mandatory traditional redistricting principle.
I more want to know when it's not really an issue,
Yeah, right.
because people are retiring and it's not actually relevant. And so it doesn't have to be a problem sometimes.
Yeah, we always like to try to find out who's retiring so that we don't have to take into that account at all. So maximize communities of interest. But yeah, that's going to be a big, your debate that you just had, that's going to be big on the direction you give us, whether to draw it and then look at it after or keep it there or not, or some plans that we do this, some plans that we do that. And where the legislators lived 10 years ago, and where they live today are two very different things because the legislatures had a massive turnover. So a lot of the districts that were drawn to protect incumbents 10 years ago, those district boundaries are not even working for the new set of legislators. And there are some places where it would be harder to take into account where legislators live, and other places where it would be easier to take it into account depending upon what those district boundaries currently look like. So that we're going to need direction from you on which of those two approaches to take. We draw some plans one way and some the other, but it's a big issue. So we have researched the residents of all of incumbents. We went to the voter file to do that. It's our hope to work with Legislative Council Service to verify those addresses with the legislators so we don't get any surprises later if they've changed their voter registration in the last 4 weeks and compared to the voter file that we own. But so we are, because I mean, the rules do say what they say, but as to which approach to take, just let us know. But we are making sure we have geocoded where they actually live.
We're still on Senate. Anybody have any other comments about Senate? I think Member Michael Sanchez, I need your help. I think I need a motion to allow for the district profiles that I described, the core retention, the compactness, boundary splits, and the incumbent pairings, to make sure that we can do that. Can I make that motion?
Yes, you can, as the chair, absolutely.
Okay. All right. I move that research and polling provide to us for any maps that we are evaluating and definitely any concepts that we're going to propose that include a district profile as I described, and I've gotten written here and I can give it, repeat it, but it's basically a lot of the population data. It did not include any performance measures or any breakdown of registered voters. That would be consistent with HC1 prohibitions. That we get a report on the retention of core districts, a compactness report using REOC and the Paulsby Topper measurements, report on boundary splits that exist, and also addresses to consider incumbent pairings.
And would this be for the Congress as well?
Yes. Yes. It would be for all the districts, including congressional districts.
I would second that motion.
Any discussion on the motion? There being no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Is anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Let's move to the next item on the agenda, which is State House. Does anybody want to comment about the State House or have any proposed concepts?
I just have a question because we were talking about how the middle districts ended up kind of, literally, it looks like the outside squished the middle districts to make it work. Is that because the way the districts were done was from the outside in, literally?
Typically, you start in the corners because you can't end up with 10,000 excess people in a corner where nowhere to put them. So you start in the corners, but you can start in the middle too, work it out. That's a factor. Was it coincidental that two of the most interesting districts, one in the House, one in the Senate, both were in the center? I mean, I think that was a contributing factor. There are other factors to it too. There were other factors involved. What happened? The judge clearly wanted to think that in southern New Mexico on the Senate side, that there wasn't enough population to accommodate all the Senate districts. So the judge did decide, he was clearly hinting to all the plaintiffs that he was going to select a plan that did crunch a southern New Mexico Senate seat. And that happened between Roswell and Alamogordo. And that didn't help matters. And it's when you crunch two seats, because there's not enough population, it will leave some excess population. Lincoln County, I think that contributed, but I think both were factors.
Well, I know for, and it's probably true both for the House and the Senate seats. I want to hear what Ms. Calero has to say about where they want to be, what they want to do. I find I mean, it seems odd to me that they're with Roswell, but I don't know. I mean, but I'd like to hear from them. And because we don't have a specific event with Native Americans in that anywhere near them. Even if it was a Zoom meeting with us and I would just want to make sure that at some point they're invited to come and tell us what they think.
Really?
Yep.
Especially in the state Senate.
Community outreach.
Absolutely.
Get in touch with the Escaleros, and I think perhaps maybe Roswell's the best venue, but if they want to also zoom in from wherever they're at, obviously they're entitled to do that. And if they would like room on the agenda, let me know.
Okay.
Anything else on House District? Next item is Public Education Commission.
Mr. Chair, there was a hand raised. I don't know if that was related to the House District, but.
Oh, okay. Yes, let me
My
know.
apologies, Mr. Sabas. Yes, it's from James Povija. My apologies if I mispronounced that, so I'm going to allow you to talk.
Chief Justice, members of the committee, thank you for the moment to chime in here. I just wanted to offer resources and community outreach to Mescalero in particular. I work with the All Indian Pueblo Council, redistricting group, and there's been a lot of talk of ensuring that there is at least a meeting in Mescalero. I will follow up with Justice Chavez or one of the staff afterwards.
James, you can reach out to me. You have my contact information. I'm happy to talk to you about it, but we also have Lily.
Hi, James.
Who you can also coordinate with.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead and introduce you now. Justice.
Any other hands up?
Justice Chavez, there are no other hands indicating that they want to provide public comment.
Okay. So back to the Public Education Commission. Anybody have any preliminary thoughts on that subject?
A thought I had when we were going through the districtor tool is I don't believe that it currently has school districts. And I think we want to keep those intact as far as the public education districts for obvious reasons. But
Ryan, can you give us just an overview of what the fluctuations have been with the Public Education Commission?
Mr. Chair, members. Well, of course, I think we have met. So when you're dealing with dividing the state into 10 districts, the districts start getting pretty large geographically, but hopefully keep them compact as well, because you're having a couple 100,000 people per district, right? And so these are the current districts. And this is more of a PDF, right?
Yeah.
So you can see that when they were adopted, they did take into account some regional commonalities. But because it took a couple 100,000 people per district, some of the districts really started getting big. But you see northwestern New Mexico is one district, and it looks like picks up most of Navajo. And also Jicarilla is in that District 5. District 6 is a Southwest Quadrant district from Cibola, Valencia. Just pick up Tehajali in there. District 7's pretty much of Doñana County in it. But Doñana County was a little too populous. So it looks like Hatch made it into the Southwest Quadrant district. District 9, just hugging the eastern New Mexico. And District 8 is Zamora, San Miguel, Guadalupe, Torrance, Debaca, Lincoln, Chavez, Otero. Most of my colors merged some. Did I do that right? District 10, a lot of north central New Mexico, including Taos, Rio Arriba. Santa Fe, District 4 has got many of the pueblos in it. Southern Santa Fe County. This is just a PDF, so we can't zoom into Albuquerque. Oh, we can't see this though. No, these are better. So here's northwestern New Mexico. How about, here's Albuquerque. So you've got a West Side South Valley district that picks up the airport and the air base. And then a pretty tight North Valley University area. Picks up part of Paradise Hills, Northeast Heights District. East Mountains go into the District 4 for the most part of the East Mountains go into District 4. So this is what it looks like when you're dealing with a couple 100,000 per district. You start picking up some areas that are not as homogeneous. For example, the West Side. We were forced to pick up that precinct 85 in there by Paradise Hills, but we did get a lot of feedback at the time. And that passed had quite a bit of support. But I mean, you can look at these and see if something really bothers you. One plan would be if you wanted to consider a status quo oriented plan, we can adjust these boundaries just to make the populations work. We could come up with some different concepts as we did 10 years ago to try to make the map look a little different as well.
Can I ask a question?
But this is the concept that passed.
Somebody was talking, was that Joaquin? Maybe?
I had a question if that's appropriate.
Definitely.
The only experience I've had with these with this jurisdiction is approving state charters for charter schools. And please excuse my ignorance, especially as a public school teacher. What else do does this commission do besides that?
To my knowledge, that is their primary authority, that they, you can get a charter from a school district or you can get it from the PEC. They're also serve as an advisory body. If they have any other statutory authority, I'm not aware of it. But charter school, many times a charter school can't get a charter from a school district, they go to the PEC.
Anything else? I'd be interested, Ryan, in just looking status quo and seeing what the populations do to it.
Justice Chavez, there is one hand that's
Yes.
Everett that would like to make public comment.
Okay.
Ms. Correa, I've unmuted you, or rather allowed you to talk.
Justice Chavez and members of the committee, good afternoon, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to pose a question here. I'm wondering within the public education districts, are the decision-making bodies the school boards still?
Right. The decision-making body if I understood your question, and I apologize if I didn't, the decision-making body that would pass the public education commission districts will be the legislature, and the bodies that approve the state school board districting boundaries are the school boards themselves.
Okay, thank you for that. The reason that I needed some clarification is because I'm not sure how much these districts have to do with the tribes, nations, and pueblos being able to move in and out of school districts. If that's an irrelevant question, then I'll end. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
We have one other person who'd like to make a public comment, Cedric Page.
Okay.
Cedric, I've permitted you to talk. You can unmute yourself now.
Good evening, Justice Chavez, members of the committee. Just two questions or issues. You had an earlier discussion about prison gerrymandering, and I believe committee member Radigan addressed that. I'd just like to add that the data collected at the various institutions is going to be wildly varying because some are state, some are federal, and some are run by contractors. And I don't think there's consistency in whether they record the data on the incarcerated individuals. So that's one point. And then the other is, will the committee consider utilizing chapter house boundaries versus precinct boundaries, particularly in the Navajo Nation and perhaps other tribal lands?
Chairman, can I take that one?
Yes.
Thank you for the question, Cedric. So Navajo utilize chapters as their local government, sort of like we use county commissions, they elect local government officials at that level. And McKinley County, working with Leonard Gorman, working with research and polling staff, County Commission just 2 weeks ago did change their boundaries in McKinley County and conformed them to chapter boundaries to the extent where possible. San Juan County has not, but we're still working with them, and there's still hope that they will conform their precinct boundaries to the chapter boundaries. That doesn't get directly to your question, but it mitigates the issue. If we can get the precinct boundaries to conform to chapter boundaries, it's more likely that Native American districts can be drawn that fit the needs of the Native American population. The rules of the CRC are to stick with precincts, not to district at the block level. However, precincts may be split only to conform with the Voting Rights Act. So the legislature and the CRC will not be doing district level districting. They'll be using precincts, but they may split a precinct if necessary to comply with the Voting Rights Act. And we hope San Juan County will continue to mitigate the problem as mentioned.
So if I'm understanding what you're saying then, Brian, if the current precincts don't meet the community of interest for the Navajo Nation because they're divided up into chapters, that we could consider that information. Is that right? Or is that a legal question?
Yes.
I mean, we need to ask the lawyers.
Well, the legal question would be if one did not district at the block level, are you somehow violating the Voting Rights Act? So the Native Americans would have to demonstrate that by splitting that precinct, we could more likely conform with the Voting Rights Act. Mm-hmm. The legislature might say, well, we want you to work with the precinct. We think we got close to what you wanted, and it didn't violate the Voting Rights Act. That would be the argument and the counter argument that could be made. So the precinct split, is the precinct split required? Would you be violating the Voting Rights Act if you didn't? That would depend on how that precinct boundary looked compared to the block levels districting option.
Or the chapters. You're talking about the chapter boundary and the precinct boundary.
Right.
And so San Juan County made that, fix that, then obviously it's not a problem.
McKinley County has conformed precinct boundaries to closer to chapter boundaries, which mitigates the problem of the Native American, the Navajos. It doesn't eliminate their concern. In San Juan County, we hope to do the same to mitigate the problem. It doesn't, they want a district at the block level like they do in Arizona. Legislature said no to that, but if we can conform the precincts, then the odds are when the legislative districts are created, they'll be closer to not splitting chapter boundaries. So it mitigates their concern, it doesn't eliminate it.
Okay, and so all I'm saying is even if San Juan County doesn't do that, all right, but what we get from the communities of interest is that splitting the precincts is necessary not to be violative of the Voting Rights Act, then we would be able to do that.
You would be able to consider that if you felt that you'd be violating the Voting Rights Act otherwise?
Not to do it.
Right.
I love the double negative reality of that
Right.
statement, but
Right.
okay.
Right.
Okay.
There have been meetings between the county clerk and the Navajo in the last week. We're trying to resolve some of these issues.
Thank you very much for that clarification and update.
Thank you, Mr. Page. I'm going to mute you now. Justice Chavez, there are no other hands indicating they'd like to provide a public comment.
Okay. I see it's 7 o'clock. Nobody present to testify or offer testimony through Zoom. Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed or abstain? Unanimously, we will adjourn. We'll see you Thursday, right, in Las Vegas?
Thursday.
Thank you all.
We'll see you later. Take care.
See you Thursday.
I know.